Evening, everybody, and welcome to the February 11, 2020 Board of Selectmen meeting. I'd like to call us to order, and I'm just wondering for the advisory committee members in the audience, do you need to call a meeting to order? Are you all set?
We're all set.
Okay, CPC, do you need to call? You don't have a quorum? Okay, just making sure that we're all in accordance with the open meeting law. So the first item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to invite our Veteran Service Officer, Keith German, to come and lead us in the first Pledge of Allegiance by a public body. Please stand.
Please rise. Face the flag of our nation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Okay, and with that, I'd like to move on to the business of the public and approval of the minutes for the Board of Selectmen meeting January 28, 2020. I've had a chance to take a look at those fairly lengthy minutes. Mary and Joe, any comments?
No, I'd like to move for approval of the minutes of January 28th, 2020.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next is public comment for items that do not appear on the agenda tonight. Sometimes I mess this up, so I'm not seeing anybody. I'm going to move forward on the agenda now. We are going to start with warrant articles. So you might remember a week or so ago, we heard from Larry Linder and Dan White in the presentation of the variety of CPC articles, or CPC projects that the CPC, after careful deliberation, has chosen to fund. We heard about those projects. We've had some time to synthesize that analysis, and we would hopefully be here to vote tonight on those project allocations. So I know Larry and Dan are here in case we have any questions. Maybe what I'll do is sort of move through, and if there's anything that you'd like to, any comments you'd like to make or any questions you'd like to ask, let's do so project by project. And once my colleagues here on the Board of Selectmen have had that opportunity, I'll turn to you. If members of the advisory committee or other members of the audience have anything to offer, we can do that as well, project by project.
Before you proceed project by project, I have a global question. If someone from CPC can just go over the aggregate budget, and then we're dividing it up by the projects, because I understand it consists of new money that's appropriated and then carry forward of money from prior years that was not spent. Is that correct? And my understanding is that the money from prior years is about 42%, or a little more than 42% of the entire budget for this year.
Larry, could you come to the microphone, please? Thanks. Name and address for the audience.
Larry Linder, 22 Water Street, CPC Chair. I don't have the numbers in front of me. We have $1,006,000 something to spend,
Right.
and 459 of that is money that was rescinded from projects that didn't go forward. So I think it was closer to 25 to 30% than 40%, because 450 from $1,006,000 something sounds not 40%-ish.
Nope. I think you.
Oh, here we go. So we have altogether $1,692,999, and out of that, returned funds from projects that didn't go forward was $459.
Yep. And so for the 459,000, is that thrown into the pot, or is it segregated based upon the projects that were not previously spent? So that, in other words, if 200,000 was for affordable housing, is that slotted in again for affordable housing? How does that work?
Thanks for that
Okay.
question. It gave me some of my gray hairs. So you have to go back to the year that the rescinded money was allotted.
Right.
And each of the three categories, housing, open space, and historic, each had to have gotten 10%
Right.
in that year. If the rescinding of some of the money meant that in that particular year for a particular category, that a particular category didn't get 10%, the money would have to go back into the fund for that category. It so happens for the money was rescinded for 2 different projects, and even so, all 3 categories were covered for the years that those projects were voted. So the money, the $459,000 went back to the general fund rather than a specific fund.
Right, so that's responding to sort of the legal requirement for the minimum, but I'm asking more from a policy perspective. If 300,000 was voted for affordable housing and only 100,000 was needed for the 10% minimum, so I understand the 100,000 was spent. So the other 200,000, is that continuing on for affordable housing, in my example, or is that just thrown into the pot and?
The latter.
Okay.
Thrown back into the pot.
So,
One thing I might just
yeah.
add, a few years ago on CPC, there used to be a rule that if you didn't use your money within like 2 years, it would go back into the pool. And our board actually asked CPC, and this was a couple of years ago, that, given that sometimes these projects are opportunistic and you may not be able to spend that money in 2 years, and given that the price of entry to buy a home and do things is so high, we asked CPC if there could be an exception made for affordable housing, so that if the money, so if $300,000 is contributed and 2 years comes along and it's still sitting there, it remains in affordable housing. I think to,
Yep.
in some ways to address the point that you're making.
right. So my question is, was that procedure followed?
No, because it's a little bit apples and oranges. What Mary said we do, if we give, they call it community housing or affordable housing, if we give them money for their opportunity fund, it stays in that fund, even if it's not used for 2 years. The particular money that was rescinded in this case was for a particular project that the money was allotted for, and the project was not going to go through. And so that, because it was earmarked for something so specific, that's why it came back to the general fund. But in general, when we give money for the opportunity fund and they don't know what opportunity it's going to be, yeah, it just stays there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, just
Sorry
while
to
Larry's up there, may I just ask, it's a different question, but on CPC, when you were here in front of us a few weeks ago, the materials referenced that there would be borrowing for approximately $400,000, but I didn't see which project that was for. I understand you've met in the last week. Could you just confirm which project is being recommended for borrowing?
Yes, it was $495,000 and change, and we voted that we wanted it to be for the Benjamin Lincoln House.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Larry. Okay. Further general comments or questions with respect to the CPC? If not, we will move to the consideration of the allocation by the CPC of $272,300 to the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust for the Opportunity Fund. So this comes back to the kind of general Opportunity Fund that the Affordable Housing Trust has available to it, so that it can, as Mary suggests, be opportunistic in the acquisition of affordable housing in town when that comes up. And I've been the liaison, Joe's now the liaison to the Affordable Housing Trust, and I can tell you the availability of those funds to sort of seize on properties, the right properties when they become available, I think is critical to the, really to the productivity of the housing trust. And without those funds, in the past, when we first got going with this, we would fund just specific projects, and it really tied the hands of the Affordable Housing Trust, I think, to do its job for the town of Hingham. So, any discussion with respect to this allocation, Joe?
No, I think this is a good allocation. I know that the trust was hoping for more, and I'm looking forward to next year. Hopefully they'll get more, but I'm in favor of this.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the public with respect to this particular CPC allocation? Seeing none, I would accept a motion.
Make a motion to appropriate a sum of money in the amount of $272,300 from the Community Preservation General Fund to be used by the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust for the HAHT Opportunity Fund.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay, the next one is the Rec Commission request to repair the tennis courts at Plymouth River School. The amount of that allocation is $75,000. Questions from my colleagues?
No.
Okay. Questions from the public with respect to the Rec Commission request for tennis fund repair money? Seeing none, I would accept a motion.
I move to appropriate a sum of money in the amount of $75,000 from the Community Preservation General Fund to be used by the Hingham Recreation Commission to repair the tennis courts at Plymouth River School located at, is that 0 or O? 0 High Street, map 124, lot 43.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next one is an $8,000 allocation to the Laner Conservation Area. So this is to erect kiosks and fencing. I think it's continuing to make this property accessible to the public. I know that when we acquired this land some years ago with CPC funding, that was a question, right? Was how is the public going to be able to access this very beautiful property in Hingham? And I think, I see Lonnie here, I think that this continues to sort of build out public access and demarcation of that property for public use. And it's an $8,000 recommendation from the CPC. Questions from my colleagues?
Nope.
Nope.
Questions from the public with respect to this CPC allocation? Seeing none, I would accept a motion.
I'll make a motion to appropriate a sum of money in the amount of $8,000 from the Community Preservation General Fund to be used by the Hingham Conservation Commission to resurvey the property boundary of the Laner Conservation Area, erect 2 wayfinding kiosks, and mark with fence posts a boundary between the Laner Conservation Area and a private property located at 0, 32, and 56 South Pleasant Street, map 137, lots 118 and 21B.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
The next is a $40,000 allocation to the Canterbury Street Cemetery. We've talked about this a little bit when it came up before us, I think, during the original hearing. This is a project that's been under consideration for the last several years. The town will take ownership of the cemetery, and it, I think, is now appropriate to take on the work of restoring that cemetery, restoring some of the historic gravestones on that site, and generally cleaning up that area, which is what the $40,000 would do. Questions from my colleagues?
Nope.
Questions from the public with respect to this Canterbury Cemetery allocation? Seeing none, I would accept a motion.
I move to appropriate a sum of money in the amount of $40,000 from the Community Preservation General Fund to be used by the Hingham Historical Commission to clear the land and repair gravestones at the Canterbury Street Cemetery located at the intersection of Canterbury and Rockland Streets, map 43, lot 110.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next is a $500,000 grant to the South Shore Country Club for the design and construction documents for a new pool to be located at the Country Club facility. Questions from my colleagues about this particular allocation?
You know, I just want to make two quick comments. The first one is to thank the Country Club Committee and Kevin Whalen for just really all of the work to try to come up with a plan that's sustainable. You know, a couple of years ago, as we were looking and seeing that the pool was nearing the end of its life, we were looking at some different options. I think we had some transitions in committee and leadership that were important to happen, and I think that some of that new thinking actually helped right-size this project for the town of Hingham. I think this is one of those projects that if it were to, it would be difficult to fund this out of our operating budget, given all the other demands on it. And so I just appreciate the work of the Country Club Committee and also of the CPC. I know this is a little bit of an unusual request for CPC, but I think the survey responses from the public about the importance of a pool was significant, and I appreciate that you listened to those voices.
Thanks, Mary.
And I just note from the master plan meetings that having a pool at the country club is something that came up repeatedly, and I think there's a real need and demand in the town for this.
And, you know, I think, too, it's sort of time to put the question before town meeting, right? I think we either want to pursue a pool as part of a property that had a pool, we want to replace that amenity, or we don't. And I think that it would allow the country club to move forward and undertake this project, or it would allow the country club to move forward with its other strategic planning efforts. So I also thank the CPC for putting this before town meeting, because I think it's an important question for the town, but it's also an important question for the future of the country club, and it would be nice to sort of get an indication of where the town wants to go with this project. So, questions from the public with respect to the allocation to the pool at the country club? Seeing none, I would accept a motion.
I'll make a motion to appropriate a sum of money in the amount of $500,000 from the Community Preservation General Fund to be used by the South Shore Country Club for the design and construction documents of a new pool to be located at 274 South Street, map 70, lot 14.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the next is an allocation of $32,030 from CPC to be used to repair the tower clocks located at the Second Parish Church. Questions from my colleagues?
I do. First, this is, I think, the second allocation of CPC funds for repair of the clock at the Second Parish. Is that correct?
Hi, Larry Lindner again. This is the second allocation having to do with the clocks at Second Parish.
Right.
The first one was part of a 4-clock
Right.
deal that the town promised in the 1800s it would take care of those 4 clocks. So the Second Parish did not ask for the first allocation. That was asked by the Historic
Right,
Commission on its
right.
behalf. But yes,
Right, okay.
it is the second
Yep.
ask for that particular clock tower.
And then while you're there, have you gotten an opinion from the council for the town as to whether or not appropriating these funds for the church is constitutional?
Definitely not for this ask, and I don't know if we got it on a previous ask, although it's definitely come up. It's come up in different towns that have CPC, and the finding has been that if it's a historic structure and contributes meaningfully to the history of the town, then it's considered appropriate for historic preservation purposes. This is not about worshiping a certain way. This is a church that was built in 1747. It adds to our streetscape, and it's very important to Hingham historically because when people started moving away from the square, this kind of was the first place they moved to, and
Yeah.
it's seen in that light, and
Sure.
it's accepted by the statute that it's the structure is the historic thing, and that's why.
So the reason I asked the question is that in 2018, the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts basically announced a new rule applicable specifically to active churches. It had to be a 3-part test that need to be reviewed. And I know the statewide advisory that went out, and I'll just read it, saying after this Supreme Court ruling came out, saying it's hard to imagine CPA communities stepping through the 3-part test for future projects without a full review by legal counsel. After all, it took the SJC 6 months and 77 pages to complete their analysis of the Acton, it was the Acton case, CPA grants. For these reasons, it won't be easy right now for CPA communities to make decisions about similar projects, and we would urge CPCs to consult with municipal council if you have pending applications. So this is a new rule that's applying going forward. I'm not aware, and maybe you are, I'm not aware of any CPC in any town throughout the state that has approved funding for a church after this SJC decision came out.
Yeah.
So if that's happening, but I would not want to be in a position to vote $32,000 and then next year vote $132,000 to defend a lawsuit for it.
Right.
So that's why I'm asking.
So I'll say from a process standpoint that all recommended motions are reviewed by council. As you're well aware, we are under discussions with council with respect to this particular allocation. I think the towns that you cite may or may not have old town warrant actions that actually require us to care for these clocks. I do think that this particular case on the facts is distinguishable from the 2018 SJC case. And so, I guess what I would suggest is that you know, if you don't feel comfortable voting on that, that's fine, but from my standpoint, I think we need to continue to advance the article and that it will go through the appropriate vetting before it's put before town meeting.
So I've made the request to town council for the review. I've not heard the result.
So, when we spoke earlier, I thought I explained to you that that John's opinion was that the 1889 warrant covered us and allowed us to move forward with this.
So I've not.
That's his
heard- okay.
opinion.
Okay. I mean, if it passes muster with town council, then it passes muster
Yeah,
with me.
I haven't got a written opinion to give you, but that's what he told me on the phone.
Okay.
Mary, any further questions?
No.
No.
Okay. Any questions?
No, I'm good.
Question?
Hi, David Anderson, 31 Old Colony Road. Can I ask you, because I'm actually writing the comment for this, it seemed to me that there could be a distinction made, though, between the town paying for it and using town funds and CPC using it. And this is contemplating CPC funds. So I'm not trying to stir up a hornet's nest here, but it struck me as I wrote it that a fallback position, certainly for Second Parish, would be to say, we'll go to the town budget
Right.
based on 1889
Yep.
implication. So I only throw that out there as a question, exercise for the student, as to whether or not, you know, CPA is ultimately, this is not a value judgment, but is it worth the fight through the CPA funds, or would there be another mechanism to get Second Parish what they need? You know, it strikes me they have a leg to stand on to say that the town is responsible in one capacity or another, and I would just raise the question of which bucket might be the easiest and most expeditious, that's all.
Sure, I did not speak with John about that particular point. I will. My guess is he'll say that for these purposes, CPC funds are funds of the town. They're raised, their revenue from taxpayers. But that said, I'll talk to him about the distinction between CPC and town budget.
And I agree with Tom. The constitutional issue is public funding, whether it comes from CPC or the town directly.
Further questions from the public with respect to the allocation to the Second Parish Church? Seeing none, I would accept a motion on this one.
I'm going to be abstaining.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to appropriate a sum of money in the amount of $32,030 from the Community Preservation General Fund to be used by the Congregation of Second Parish to restore the tower clocks located at 685 Main Street, map 126, lot 47.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay. And last but not least is the allocation of $772,000, which, as you heard Mr. Lindner discuss, is a part grant, part loan, recommended by CPC to be granted to the Hingham Historical Society for the purpose of acquiring the Benjamin Lincoln House. Questions from my colleagues on this one?
I would just, a comment and a question. The comment is just that I think that this is a rare opportunity to bring an important town asset into the town and keep it in the town. And I'm grateful for the Historical Society for all of its work, as well as the CPC. Again, this was kind of complex to work through, but to me, this is exactly why we have CPC, because if we didn't, this would go into private hands and the things we'd lose. It's my understanding, Karen, that there are some different conditions that need to be worked out, but that would be part of the advisory committee's work, so that my understanding is that our vote tonight is to advance the project, to support the project, and that council would be working with our advisory colleagues to, and obviously all interested parties on the conditions with respect to things like public access and all these other things.
Right, and thanks for bringing up that process point. I probably should have brought this up at the outset. I think that, you know, and we talked about this maybe in the last time CPC came before us. There's been, I think, a real evolution in the CPC process in this town, thanks to the great leadership of the folks that have been appointed and serving on the CPC board since its inception. And, you know, from when I started as a liaison to the CPC in the mid-2000s to now, you know, I think the process has really professionalized and become more sophisticated than it was when we started out. And so as part of that kind of continued evolution of making sure that when we make these grants, the funds, these are public funds, as Joe said, and to make sure that these public funds that we are allocating to these projects are spent appropriately and in keeping, I think, with the intentions expressed at town meeting. Very often in the last several years, there'll be a grant agreement that will overlay the allocation of the funds. So when we hand out the money, we're also asking the recipient to sign off on, the conditions with respect to the use of those funds. So this, I think the way the process has evolved to, in terms of our coordination with council, is that CPC has expressed its concerns, and we have those notes, and the advisory committee will have those notes as part of their deliberation. We can express our concerns tonight about, when this moves forward to advisory committee, what might be some of the things that we would want the advisory committee to think about as they review this project. The advisory committee, as you know, writes a comment to town meeting that discusses its deliberations and then also supplies a recommended motion to town meeting for its action. The recommended motion is sort of the binding vote that then would inform a grant agreement together with the advisory committee comment. The grant agreement is something that is really under the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen as the kind of legal authority of the town. So as Mary said, as these projects work their way through the process, they'll actually end up back here for kind of final formalities with respect to the conditions on the use of the funds. So the grant agreement would be something that we would work with town council to finalize after we hear what town meeting has to say, CPC has to say, and the advisory committee has to say. And it's, it's not unlike what town meeting expects of the Board of Selectmen in any number of cases where, town meeting will vote to acquire a piece of property, but then the Board of Selectmen is actually the authority that runs through those negotiations. So rather than sort of condition and grant agreement by an entire committee, it's really grant agreement informed by those discussions, but then finalized by council with the Board of Selectmen.
So typically, those agreements in this case would include an historical preservation restriction being placed on the property. So it runs to the benefit of the town. I think it's important. I had the chance, and I know many of us have had the chance to go through the Benjamin Lincoln House. And I just note that in addition to the house, there are artifacts there that are amazing. And this is really an opportunity for the town to benefit from that. So I am very much in support of this.
So, I will say that I had the opportunity to sit with representatives from the Historical Society, the advisory committee, along with the town administrator and the assistant town administrator and legal counsel to sort of walk through, now that this is a possibility for the Historical Society, how do we get from here to there? And so there's work that needs to be done. My understanding is that the Historical Society has or will have conversations with the permitting boards on the second floor to review their plans for the use of the building, that incorporated in all of this and ultimately in the grant agreement would be some protection for the town's investment in this building should things go sideways. And to your point, I think because of the unique nature of that house, there are existing historic restrictions on the property that need to be coordinated with the rights of the town. So there's work to do. I think to me, it's a to-do list, checklist sort of thing. It's not, there's no impediment, I think, to moving forward. But those would be some of the things that we need to work together on to be sure that when we come to town meeting, we can answer the legitimate questions, I think, of the citizenry with respect to this allocation. And be really, really proud, I think, that we've put the Historical Society in the position of being able to preserve just a gem of history right in the square. So,
if I may add one more thing, I don't know if it's been mentioned, but I think it's important for the public because, in particular, as we're going through all these budgets and you're hearing that the town is purchasing this historic home, one of the things very early on when this started to come into fruition, the Historical Society actually undertook a campaign to basically create an endowment that would into perpetuity pay for the maintenance of the facility and any required work on it. And, I had conversations with some of the project proponents. I suspect Karen and Joe did too. And, from my perspective, I said, look, this has to come with an endowment, because if we have to find room in the operating budget for this, it's kind of a non-starter. And, you know, again, through the generosity of so many members of our community, that's a possibility. So you haven't heard talk about an endowment, but this house comes with an endowment so that this will not find its way into the operating budget. And I think that's important to mention tonight.
And, you know, and to that end, I think it's really, really important, because I've seen commentary, I know the two of you have seen commentary that suggests that this money could be used as part of the operating budget or to fund things that are part of the operating budget, and that is just not the case. CPC funds need to be expended only with respect to the requirements as set forth in the CPA, the Community Preservation Act. So these monies need to be spent for particular purposes. They're the purposes that are consistent with the grants that you've heard here tonight: open space, affordable housing, recreation, historic preservation, and we can't spend them otherwise. So I guess I just want to make clear that this money, we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul here. Like, the town made a decision years ago to set aside these funds to undertake these particular purposes, and we are the stewards of those funds for those purposes. But this money, should we not vote it for the tennis courts or anything else, is not otherwise available to the town for any other purpose. So I just want to be crystal clear about that. Joe, did you have something else?
That's it.
All right, questions from the public, comments from the public? See members of the Historical Society here, if you'd like to make any further comments, or, no? Okay, all right. No further questions? If not, I'd take a motion.
I move to appropriate the sum of $772,000 as recommended by the Community Preservation Committee to be used by the Hingham Historical Society to help purchase the Benjamin Lincoln House located at 181 North Street, map 61, lot 12, in order to repurpose the property as a museum and to meet such appropriation by A, expending $42,313 from the Community Preservation Historic Preservation Reserve, and $234,356 from the Community Preservation General Fund, and B, authorizing the town treasurer, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, to borrow $495,331, together with the costs of borrowing under Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 7, or any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds or notes of the town therefore.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. What we got next? Thank you, thanks for coming. So we have one more warrant article, and then we'll be joined by our school committee colleagues. I guess we're ahead of schedule here. We have an amendment to the Council on Aging bylaw. I did talk with John Coughlin and with Dawn Sibber, who's the chair of the Council on Aging, about the need to just clean up the bylaw. I think that's all it is. Do you have any
No, I spoke to,
comments?
I was with the Council on Aging just before this meeting. You've summarized it exactly right.
And Dawn, the Council on Aging worked with John Coughlin to develop the revised bylaw language.
Yes.
Questions?
No, these cleanup articles are important to do, and I appreciate everybody's work on them.
They're not always fun to do, but they're
Not always
important
fun
to
to
do.
do, but helpful to have them done.
Questions from the public with respect to the Council on Aging bylaw changes? Seeing none, I would accept the motion.
I move to recommend favorable action of Article N.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Do you want to do the country club, because Kevin is
I
here?
make a recommendation.
Sure.
We have time here. Kevin Whalen is here from the country club.
Great minds think alike up here. Say that.
It would save him a couple of hours of his life.
Kevin, I think you were at a meeting not too long ago where we didn't do this, and I apologize for that late night.
I appreciate it.
So we are going to move to Article CC, Maintenance Facility for the South Shore Country Club. It's actually a turf, what's it called?
Turf Care Center.
Turf Care Center, Tom. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Kevin Whalen from from the Country Club.
The article in question is requesting $2.2 million for the Turf Care Center at the South Shore Country Club. As many of you know, the current maintenance area is underneath the pool. It is currently, portions of it are currently segregated off because we cannot use them due to cement falling from the ceiling and things of that nature. We have done some remediation to allow us to use some of the building. And the reason why we are going forward with a request to do a design and build, go right from design into build, is twofold. One is that, it is an emergency basis, that we are currently in a situation where, we can't use all of the facility, and it could be at any time that we would have to shut the whole building down, which would really make it difficult for us to continue our operation out on the course. 85% of our revenue is from golf, so it's important that we have the continuity of our operation and able to keep the equipment going to maintain the grounds out on the course. And the second thing is that the building itself is really a box of a structure. It's cold storage for most of it. There's 3 different sections in the building that will be built. There'll be cold storage, which will be about 7,500 square feet. And then there'll be 4,000 additional square feet, which will be a maintenance area, which will be a garage type of building. And then the other portion will be for a office space for the staff and things of that nature. It's not a building that would be open to the public. It's going to be, just really for people that are working at South Shore Country Club, so it's not like where you have to get a lot of public input and things of that nature. It's a pretty straightforward building. It's a box on a cement. I've been working with a couple of different vendors to try to see if we can get some prices. The request that we are doing of $2.2 million is essentially what I feel what we're going to be able to afford as we move forward. As we know that this is, as an enterprise account, we are going to have to, pay this back as we go over the next several years. So, that we're comfortable with a $2.2 million ask. As we get prices and begin to move forward, if we have to, we'll cut back on the, on the size of the building to make sure that we're able to afford it within the request.
So it's sort of a not-to-exceed number? It's a not-to-exceed number?
Yeah, exactly.
And it, in part because your budget can support the debt service on the $2.2 million.
Correct. The other part of the building that we're looking to build too is an environmental center. This will ensure that we are able to store all of the fuel, the pesticides, things of that nature, properly, and also a recycling station for washing down the carts and things of that nature that would also, one, be environmental friendly, but also save on water and also sewer bills as well. So that's how we're moving forward. I think we've done some pre-work. I mean, I think back here in September, we were talking about doing a master plan. And I think part of the problem was that we had to kind of almost take this and kind of do this separately. It's obviously on the fringe of the property, but we have hired an engineer to do the initial elevations, SciTech Engineering. They've done that. We've also hired Golf Course Structures Alternatives. They've come in, done a needs analysis to see, based on all the equipment that we have, what it's going to take to kind of get all that indoors. The only thing that will not be indoors, this does not include, is will not have the capability to keep all of our carts year-round, the golf carts year-round indoors. It'll be, in the wintertime, we'll be able to keep the carts indoors throughout the winter, but during the season, we won't be able to keep them all indoors.
Okay.
So we've met with them, and we've also met with a town engineer consultant as well to kind of get a pathway forward. Because this is not over $5 million, we can't technically do a design build, so what we would have to do is we would have to do the design first, get that out and back in, and then at that point in time, go out to bid for the construction of the project.
Okay, I get that.
And also, I was at the last meeting a few weeks ago, the Country Club Management Committee has authorized me to move forward to begin to look at the process to hire a project manager. We feel with the pool is going to be happening as well, that it might be a good opportunity for us to kind of have someone there all the time to kind of guide us through the process of both projects.
Great. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay.
Joe, any questions?
What's your timing? When do you think we'll actually get this underway?
Well, so the money will become available, and we've done a lot of pre-work, which we're paying out of our budget currently. So we're hoping that we'd be able to get right into the design. The design is not overly complicated. We've met with all the boards just on a preliminary basis from, with Emily and the planning board. conservation, also with the town building inspector, just to kind of get an idea of what we're going to have to do. The site that we have chosen, they feel is appropriate for it. It's mostly disturbed. There is a river there, so we can't go within 50 feet of it, but most of it is disturbed within the 100-foot. That was previous a building there, so we're able to use up to the 50-foot mark. So we'll have to go through that process. So I imagine what I'm hoping to do is be pretty aggressive and have the design out on the street as soon as possible. Once the money becomes available, get the design back probably within a 5 or 6 month period and try to get it out to bid and construction beginning within a year.
And my understanding, this is really essential to one of the core functions of the country club, which is golf.
Yes, I mean, I think we pride ourselves on the course being in great shape, and our crew does a great job. But also you have, the maintenance shop is important to maintain the equipment. We have, a grinding station, which makes sure the blades are all sharp, and we have an individual that works 30 hours a week doing that. So it's all those different things. I mean, we also just bought, $420,000 of equipment last year. We want to make sure that we're able to keep that in good condition and that it lasts as long as possible. So I think all those different factors, we want to make sure that we're good stewards, not only for the equipment, but also for making sure that we have a safe environment for our employees to work in. The other thing is, too, the greenhouse where they currently are. I mean, it's an older building that is in pretty rough shape, and that's something that would be replaced as well, that would be coming down. Okay, nothing else.
Just 2 points. The first one is that this is, while this is a borrowing and it goes through town meeting and a warrant article, this actually gets paid for out of the enterprise fund budget for the country clubs. So remember that the country club is a self-funded entity. So as Kevin is talking about sizing his project, that's because he knows how much revenue is coming in, and he's going to make sure that he has the capacity. What I would tell you, Kevin, is looking at the financing, we get guidelines from our town financial advisors about rates to use. The recommended rate that's being suggested right now for long-term debt of 20 years is 3.5%. I can tell you that right now, that rate quoted for Hingham as of last week was 1.4%. Now, our financial advisors, we've been talking to them because we do it ongoing, and we basically said, hey, what sort of interest rate should we use? And they've suggested that we continue with the 3.5% for anything that's a year or more out, because they see a lot of question marks on the horizon, both nationally and globally. But as you're going through design and getting closer to this, I would stay in touch with our town accountant and with Tom, because I think that if the rates are favorable, that just gives you a little bit more to work with, and we certainly want your committee to have as much information to make the best choices as possible.
Right. And I thank you, and I appreciate that. And the other thing, too, is I want to remind everyone that we did have a significant reduction in our budget for a lot of different reasons for next year. And that is in preparation of beginning to be able to prepare to pay for this, expenditure.
Questions from the public with respect to the turf care center at the country club? Seeing none, I would take a motion.
I move to recommend favorable action of Article CC.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you all.
The other article that's not school-related would be the Article E. And the school department, I think, was planning to participate in some of these other article review.
Okay. We could also do Article E, and then I could do the proclamation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, Article E, salaries of town officers. Yep.
No one's getting a raise.
Yeah. Is that in here? Is that in the book?
Yeah, here it is.
Do you want it? No, I got it right here. Oh, sure. Okay, so there are certain town officers that are paid every year pursuant to a vote at town meeting. They include the three of us, the elected assessors, the town clerk, and the members of the municipal light board. So The selectmen are paid an annual rate of $2,000 each, except the chair shall receive $2,500 for the period of incumbency. The assessors are paid at an annual rate of $1,800, with the chair receiving $2,000. The town clerk is paid in accordance with our personnel classification system. And the municipal light board is paid at an annual rate of $214 each, to be paid from the receipts of the electric light department. So essentially, volunteer positions across the board. But we are grateful for these stipends. Comments or questions?
Nope. As I said before, this, I think, is consistent with prior years. There's no change at all.
No change, yep. And I don't know, with respect to the town clerk, she's subject to, longevity and all the, whatever the.
She actually, believe it or not, doesn't get longevity or other benefits either, because she's an elected official.
Elected official, okay, wow. Okay. Mary.
I'll make a motion to recommend favorable action on Article E.
Second.
Any other discussion? Sorry, did I ask? Anybody have any questions on this? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Want to do the Lincoln proclamation? Want me to read the Lincoln proclamation? Sure. Okay, so, many of you in the audience may know that this weekend we celebrate Lincoln Day with a ceremony at Old Ship Church. If you haven't gone, it really is just a really tremendous event. And the town actually proclaims February 15th, 2020 as Lincoln Day. And we have a proclamation that has traditionally been read by our colleague Paul Healy in a very
Dramatic.
very theatrical.
Gusto.
Yes, with a lot of gusto. So I'm feeling just a slight bit of pressure today, because I know he's watching wherever he is. And I know I'm not going to do it justice, but with your forbearance, I would like to read the proclamation of Lincoln Day for the town of Hingham. Whereas the town of Hingham was settled in 1635 by a small band of Puritan pilgrims, many who came from Hingham, England, and environs, and whereas among the descendants of those original settlers were two famous American public figures who shared the common family name Lincoln, as well as a common heritage, and whereas it is a long-standing Hingham tradition to honor and celebrate their birthdays. General Benjamin Lincoln, a lifelong Hingham citizen and hero of the American Revolution, and Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president and towering figure of the Civil War. And whereas we honor and celebrate the lives and deeds of the two Lincolns because of the indelible legacy of community building and preservation they have left for us, and whereas in this year, 2020, we pay special honor to 4 centuries of our citizens, those famous like Benjamin Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln, and those unknown to history, who worked in a myriad of ways to build and sustain this wonderful community of Hingham and the broader communities of state and nation. And whereas the preservation of community is a perpetual task in which each generation must fully participate, now therefore we, the Board of Selectmen of the town of Hingham, do hereby officially proclaim Saturday, February 15, 2020, Lincoln Day. We urge also that as many citizens as possible join us at Old Ship Meeting House on Saturday, February 15, 2020 at 11 a.m. for a patriotic ceremony of celebration. Finally, we urge each citizen to take to heart the examples of the two Lincolns and those 4 centuries of Hingham citizens, and we urge each citizen to participate in some concrete way in the strengthening and preservation of this community of Hingham and the broader communities of state and nation for the generations which will succeed us. Given under our hands and seal of Hingham this 11th day of February 2020, Karen Johnson, Mary M. Power, Joseph M. Fisher. Thank you.
I move that we adopt the proclamation as read.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Should we do the liquor license, Tom?
Sure.
Can we do that? Okay. So we have a liquor license. My understanding, it's been reviewed, all the paperwork is in order. Chief's waving with a
Yes.
thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, just to find. So, any questions with respect to the liquor license? So it's a one-day liquor license on behalf of South Elementary School for the South Elementary Spring Social to be held at the community center. Any questions from the public with respect to the grant of this one-day liquor license? Okay, seeing none, I would accept a motion.
I move to approve the issuance of a special one-day wine and malt beverage license to Laura Glennon on behalf of South Elementary School for the South Elementary Spring Social to be held at Hingham Community Center on March 14, 2020, from 7 p.m. to 10:30 p.m.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay, I think we're right on time-ish. So I was thinking maybe we would do the forecast update first, if that's okay with you, or if you were wanting to, are you okay to stay?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
Do you want to wait till the school?
Yeah, I was just asking Mary if that's.
Yep. Oh, sure.
What about reports, maybe, Karen?
Sure, yeah, we might as well.
Yeah, almost 10 minutes.
Yeah. Michelle, anything to report? One of these days, I'm going to just fall out of my chair when you, like, start to read, like, a lengthy report. Okay. Tom?
Not today.
Okay.
Thanks.
Joe?
There's so much going on in town, but
Exactly.
one important point of interest is with respect to the compressor station. The state has agreed to do a permanent air quality monitoring
It's huge.
In South Weymouth, which is one step, but certainly not all the steps that need to be taken to make sure that the citizens in the area are protected. So I know that there are ongoing disputes, there's ongoing discussions, and the town of Hingham is monitoring them on an ongoing basis.
And it might seem like a no-brainer, but there was no air quality and testing site, like, adjacent to the parcel where the compressor station would be built. So it was like the Blue Hills was like the closest place to measure the air quality. So I think it's a big deal. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Mary?
No.
I don't have anything either. I feel like it is a really, really busy time in Town Hall, and we're working hard every day, but I think maybe because of that, nothing really jumps out, so nothing to report tonight. All right.
Like when you drive down the street and there's too many signs, you can't read them.
Yeah,
right?
exactly, exactly. It's all good. It's all good stuff. All right, so just to give you a little preview, I'll do a little commercial for what's coming up next. We are going to do a financial update. So I think I might have mentioned to the public at a prior meeting, we meet, and we'll probably meet now every few weeks with the forecast group to go over the revenue projections for our budget picture. It's a revenue side only analysis of what we have to spend, and then the folks around that table include the town and the schools, staff and elected officials. We take that information back to kind of our respective budget responsibilities, and that informs some important decisions that we'll all have to make to get to a balanced budget. We must present the town with a balanced budget, so we must undertake, I think, these difficult conversations and evaluation of priorities leading up to town meeting. So we will run through that forecast with you all tonight, as well as our colleagues on the school committee. And then Mary has a municipal financial update presentation that gives some added color, I think, to the state of play in our budget and the number of areas that we need to evaluate and the impact of borrowing and debt service on our budget and on our levy. And then we will move to the presentation of the school budget. This will be the first time we've had an opportunity publicly to discuss the school budget with our school committee colleagues. And then we have a few warrant articles that also involve the schools, including, importantly, a request that, this is not a warrant article, but a request that the Board of Selectmen sign a statement of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Authority for the replacement of the windows at Plymouth River School, which has been a project that's been kind of on our list for several years, and which Mary, I think, and Paul Healy negotiated mitigation money to help support. So that's what we have coming up, hopefully in just a few minutes. Do you want to see if they...
Will be joining us now, and I just texted the AdCom is on their way down.
Okay, great.
We'll take a minute break.
Okay.
If I had music, I would play it.
No jokes, nothing?
Told that there are, John Asher texted
Nothing for this
me,
room.
Michelle said that there are some technical difficulties, and I think he's working on them. I don't know, for your slides? No, for Comcast.
So Tom will do his thing, you'll do yours, and then we'll do that.
Okay, so there still is no picture. So,
Are they recording it? It's
yes,
just
they're recording it for playback, and I'm not sure if there's any sound that's going through, but there's no picture. Huh?
Hey, Corey, Carlos. Hey, Tom, I guess there's no live picture going.
He told me just before the meeting started.
Okay.
It's being recorded, so we have the recording, and it'll be tomorrow.
Scratch my cornea.
It's being recorded and saved, but it's not being projected in the room.
Thank you. Thank you. So,
Okay.
no,
Do you need to call your group to order?
downstairs.
Okay.
No, we have no more votes. Yeah, go through those.
So, should we have Victor and Dan sit over here? Okay. Yeah. I mean, Victor and Bob, yeah. I still miss Dan Call. We're just waiting for our advisory committee colleagues, and then we can begin. Thanks for being here tonight. I understand there's no live feed of the picture of the meeting. If you can, I'm getting a 1 minute. If you can hear me, it is being recorded. Okay. So apparently you can't see me or hear me, which is probably the mark of a great politician, right?
I just got word that its picture is fine now.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, never a dull moment. Evan, are you the only one coming from AdCom, or is there something you said? Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, nice of you to be here. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say whatever you want to say before everybody gets here. Yeah. Okay.
You almost succeeded.
Yeah.
Does the school committee need to call the order?
I asked her. She said no, but I'm going to ask again, just for.
She'll just ask me to ask.
Yeah. And I was going to ask AdCom too, but I'm assuming they've been in session. Victor? All right, I think we're ready to resume. For those of us who toil long hours here in Town Hall, usually by ourselves in these meeting rooms, it's actually quite festive to have such a great crowd tonight, so thanks for making the time to come. I understand from Chair Michelle Eyre that the school committee has been called to order. Okay. And Victor?
We've been I guess we've been recessed to come down here, so I call us back into order.
Okay, the advisory committee has been called to order. Any other public bodies in the room that need to be called to order for public meeting purposes? Seeing none, we're going to switch it up a little bit bullet point wise, and we're going to move to the forecast update first. We'll then proceed to the municipal financial update and then the school budget presentation.
Thank you, Karen. So several weeks ago, I gave an update of the forecast publicly, so I just wanted to let everyone know that we have in fact updated that forecast with some new information we received at the end of January. In large part, I won't bury the lead. We are now facing a $1.7 million deficit. That is in large part, the way that number is obtained, or the way we get to that number, is if you remember at the initial forecast, we didn't yet have the school department budget. So as that school department budget was created and presented by the superintendent now a week or so ago, we're able to put that into the forecast so that the forecast is more representative of what we anticipated. In addition to that, we received notice from the governor that his proposed budget, not the final state budget, but his proposed budget includes about an additional $400,000 in state aid. And in addition to that, we have received indications from our healthcare provider, the Group Insurance Commission, GIC at the state, that while we carry 10% year over year in an anticipated increase for healthcare costs, the costs actually only went up by about 6%. So that's now reflected in here as well. So again, the main message here is that we're now working from an anticipated or an understood deficit right now of about $1.7 million going into the AdCom review period for the budget.
Questions from my Board of Selectmen colleagues? Mary? No. Questions from the school committee with respect to the forecast? Questions from my advisory committee colleagues with respect to the forecast? The one thing I will say is that, we fine-tune, Tom and Sue Nickerson and Michelle fine-tune these numbers weekly, right? And one of the places that we've, in the past, been able to find some savings kind of later in the budget process actually is in the GIC insurance funding, because sometimes we don't get that information till later. So we actually have to carry that higher number through the budgeting process. But that ends up being, has ended up being one of the places where we can realize some savings to be able to apply to something like this operating deficit. So it's great that we're fine-tuning these numbers, but what it means is there's not a lot of fat in the numbers that we can cut going forward. I just want us all to keep that in mind as we're going back and looking at our budgets and sharpening our pencils to try to resolve this significant deficit.
Karen, I do have a question for
Victor?
Tom. So on the forecast, on the overlay, you're showing 850 as compared to last year at 350. Could you sort of just explain for the group what the current status is on that?
Okay, the reason why is if you see up above the unused levy capacity, that is now 0. We have taken that 500,000 and added to the overlay for the senior means tested exemption.
Yeah. And listen, I want to be clear, for some reason, even though I thought I was clear, for some reason, I think there have been reports that somehow this is an exemption from real estate taxes for senior citizens. There are a couple things to think about here. First of all, it's not an exemption, it's a reduction. The maximum reduction is probably in that $900 range for the average tax bill in the town, which is in the $10,000 range. That's first. Second, this tax exemption is available to our neediest senior citizens that are eligible for what's called circuit breaker at the state level. And circuit breaker, they have circuit breaker in education, they have circuit breaker for real estate taxes, where it's a barrier beyond which you shouldn't fall. And so it's taking those folks that are circuit breaker eligible and giving them an opportunity to apply for really a very slight reduction in their property taxes. That's all. And so I'm not sure where that message got lost, but that's what that's doing. And what I explained when we talked about this 2 weeks ago probably is that, first of all, we will have an opportunity to identify a funding source and a percentage amount on an annual basis. So if we think this ultimately is too expensive, we can ratchet it back. We could also find another funding source if we wanted to every year. But, it's something that we have talked about in terms of targeted tax relief. I talked with many of you about this when I was running for the Board of Selectmen a couple of years ago. So we had tax relief built into the budget whereby every house shared a proportionate amount of that $500,000. And what this does is take that same $500,000 that we all benefited from and says, we're going to dedicate that benefit now, that tax benefit now, to our neediest senior citizens in town. So that's the philosophy behind it, that's the mechanics of it, and that's the sort of financial aspect of that reduction in the overlay account. Further questions? Questions from the, you good? Questions from the public with respect to the forecast? Okay, seeing none, I will, okay, sure. Libby, could you stand up to the microphone, name and address, please?
Libby Lewicki, 370 Gardner Street. I'm looking at the 10-year history of local receipts and just curious what might account for the reduction in receipts since 2018. Like, why was 2018 such a high year, and why has it gone back down?
Those were the building permit fees for the Avalon project and Broadstone Bear Cove on Route 3A. So when those building permits were pulled, we get building permit revenue that's really very high. But that's not anything that's recurring. Those were unusually high.
Yeah, one-time money.
And so I'm glad actually you brought up this page, though. So we get, we have sources of income. Mary will touch on this a little bit in her presentation. So one of the sources of income are the excise taxes and use taxes that you pay in town. And we very carefully, like the meals tax is part of this, we very carefully analyze what the prior trends have been, and then we try to budget close to, but not 100% of what our experience has been. Because in town budgeting, if you get this wrong and town meeting approves a budget, we don't have the money to run the town. And so I think we try to be as realistic as we possibly can. We're trying not to leave money on the table, but we're also trying to be very mindful that, you could decide that you're not going to buy a new car, and your neighbor could decide they're not going to buy a new car, and all of a sudden our motor vehicle excise tax number begins to drop. So some of this is, behavior and trends that we have had to, we try to analyze over a 5 and 10 year period to come up with the numbers that we carry in the budget. And this is another actually aspect of the budget that gets fine-tuned right up until town meeting. But this is I think a realistic starting point. They probably won't move too much, but we do continue to evaluate with the help of G. Montgomery what each of these receivables look like for the town. Because we're trying to put every dollar we have available to us to work for us in the operating budget. Good question, thank you. Further questions with respect to the forecast? Okay.
It's actually a good dropping off, a good launching point. The presentation I'm going to walk through, I think some of our colleagues have copies of this. This is going to be posted on the website tonight, but I'd also just direct your attention to the two different monitors. We just thought it might be helpful to give a little bit of a bird's eye view of town revenue and town expenses. And some of this has come from some work that our board has done over the last few years. And, some of it is new, and some of it is just our board trying to be responsive to things that we're hearing, things that people are writing to us, which again is very helpful. Just as a starting point, in our town budget, our revenue is about $109 million. And if you notice, the about 3/4 of that pie comes from the tax levy. And, that only can grow by 2.5% a year under Proposition 2.5. You'll see that we also have new growth, which is the little red or orange piece. And that's money that the state allows us. We can actually increase our levy every year when there's development that goes on. Now, in Hingham, there are typically kind of two kinds of development that form new growth. The first one are projects like the Avalon or the Broadstone Bear Cove or Linden Pond, some of those really big developments. Those add a lot to our new growth. But we also typically get about $500,000 a year as a town in new growth that comes from homeowners making additions to their house. So if any of you have, you've put an addition on your house, the assessor goes out, they may reassess your home, and your property tax bill goes up. What's important to understand with new growth is that's how our revenue pie gets bigger. Again, remember, we can only levy an increase of 2.5% a year, but the new growth is on top of it. We also get some revenue for excluded debt, which is when town meeting votes by 2/3 to temporarily raise the taxes of the town to pay for a capital project. We have excluded debt for the Hingham Middle School, We have excluded debt for East School. And what's important to remember about excluded debt is if we collect revenue of $1.5 million in excluded debt, we have a debt service expense of the same amount. So that money comes into the town, but it's basically accounted for. You'll see that that green slice, which represents about 10% of the pie, is state aid. That's a combination of general government aid and education aid that comes through Chapter 70. The discussion we just had about local receipts, that's that kind of purple slice of the pie. It's about $10 million in aggregate. And, you know, as Karen talked as a town, when Karen was on the advisory committee in, you know, the 2007-2008 time period, our local receipts dropped by a couple $1 million from one year to the next. And she was part of the advisory committee that had to make very difficult choices to actually contract a lot of services and figure things out. Another reason it's so important to forecast local receipts accurately is because if we can't get it wrong, we can't go back to the state and say, well, we need to levy more, or we can't go out and necessarily count on any new growth. And then we also, this year in our revenue, some of our budget is being funded through fund balance, which is our rainy day fund. Now, the advisory committee has a financial policy that essentially says that we shouldn't use our rainy day fund for ongoing expenses, because you might not be able to count on those. But from time to time, the town, in an effort to balance the budget, may allocate a couple of $100,000 out of fund balance to our revenue. And we did that, thank you, Victor. And we've done that for capital with the idea that, again, it was kind of a one-time purchase. We don't like to fund, you know, our town budget is about 80% personnel expenses. We don't like to use fund balance for that funding, because if it's not there in 1 year, we have trouble. There's been a lot of talk about kind of benchmarking and 20 towns, and I just thought these were a couple statistics that I shared with the advisory committee in the fall, and I thought that they were a good table setting for tonight. In comparison to Hingham, for personnel purposes, we've identified 19 benchmark communities. Some of them are in geographic proximity to Hingham, others have similar demographics. And from a personnel standpoint, what we strive to do is use those benchmark communities as we're looking at labor rates. That's really kind of all we've historically used them for. So when the Board of Selectmen, the Personnel Board negotiates a contract with police officers on behalf of our board, they'll look at the wage rates for police officers in these comparable towns. And we like to be right about at the midpoint. That's where we like to be. But I did take a look and see where we were on some metrics, and our total tax levy is about $83 million, and compared to our benchmark communities, we're about in the midpoint. 88.6% of our tax levy comes from residential property taxes, and we're 9th out of 20. There are a couple communities, Needham is one that comes to mind. Needham probably gets about 24% of its tax levy from commercial businesses. But in Hingham, like other communities, close to 89% of our levy is residential. So that means if there's a tax increase, it's largely borne by the residential property holders. The average single-family tax bill in Hingham is $9,774. If you add community preservation, you get very close to $10,000. And it's worth noting that with the recent changes in the tax laws, that's actually the threshold for deduction of taxes. So, you know, when I led the Friends of Hingham Public Schools, when we were building East School, we said, gosh, the increase in taxes, you get a little bit more of a tax deduction. Unfortunately, that's not the case for many of us in Hingham anymore. And then I'd point out that our residential tax rate, which is a combination of assessed value, is actually ranked 17th out of 20. And, you know, there are a lot of people that say, well, gosh, you know, there are different spending levels in Hingham, and why doesn't Hingham spend more? Well, our tax rate is $11.81, and by statute, it can only go up by 2.5% a year. The whole pie can only grow by 2.5% a year. This is just a chart that shows our operating revenue growth for about 16 years. And if you look at the table on the right-hand side, the numbers that are in red are actually from the 5-year forecast. And what you'd notice, in the last 10 years, our revenue's been growing by about 4%. And again, that's a combination of the levy, it's a combination of new growth, local receipts. But what we've been saying and what's occurring is that our revenue growth is slowing down. And in the next few years, we're only expecting that our revenue is going to grow by somewhere in the neighborhood of 3%. Actually, next year, it's only projected to grow by about 1.6%. So you might say, well, why is the revenue growth slowing down? Well, there are a couple things that are happening, but the really big variable is this thing that we call new growth. When the new growth slows down, the pie doesn't grow by more than about 2.5%. That's kind of the bottom line. And, just as Libby asked the question about, why the license and permits were so high in, a couple of years ago, if Avalon comes in and pulls a building permit, that's several $100,000. If I go in and pull a building permit to, bump out my kitchen, that's a much smaller number. And as we look in Hingham at how developed Hingham is right now and what's on the horizon, we don't see a lot of those big projects like an Avalon or a Linden Ponds. So that's happening. Also, next year, believe it or not, we have been collecting revenue from an old MSBA State Building Assistance Program for many years. Right now, when you build a school, the MSBA reimburses as the school is built. It used to be that they'd send you the money after. And so next year, $1.6 million in our state aid goes away because those reimbursements are all done. So, one of our challenges as we're looking at our revenue picture is, gosh, how do we make up that $1.6 million? And again, remember, we can only increase the levy by 2.5% a year. So, what has the Board of Selectmen and the town been trying to do to raise revenue? You may recall that several years ago, town meeting adopted the meals tax. The meals tax has been in excess of $800,000 of revenue in the last couple of years. We use about $600,000 of it to defray the cost of the middle school. That was some tax relief that we offered for citizens. We use the other piece to fund municipal services because, with more restaurants, come more police calls, come more fire calls. Several years ago, Hingham made a decision that we were going to actually start our own ambulance business. Someone once said to me that, gee, when, I see ambulances down in South Hingham, and gosh, that's costing me a whole lot of money as a taxpayer. I'm not sure I like that. In our local receipts, we collect $1.2 million in ambulance revenue every year. Our fire department budget's about $5 million, and we actually are able to defray over 20% of the cost through the ambulance service. The ambulance service is actually a profit center to the town. But again, as we look at Medicare reimbursement rates, we have to be careful with forecasting. If Medicare reimbursement rates change, we're making less money on every ambulance run. Town meeting adopted something called 43D, which basically accelerates commercial development. You may recall that 88% of our tax levy comes from residential property taxes. Past and current boards of selectmen have been looking to try to advance low-impact commercial development. 43D has helped with that. The South Hingham Study Group did an important study and has a wonderful body of work that is allowing the town to, again, pursue low-impact commercial development in South Hingham. If we can grow that pie, and we can grow it with businesses that are less of a demand on services, we think that's beneficial to everybody. We actually, through a town meeting article, changed the amount of money that we can withdraw from the building department revolving fund, so that as we have all this permit activity and inspections, We're paying for more of that out of our revolving fund and less out of the operating budget. Fees and permits in the town, we do a review every 3 years, benchmark against other communities to make sure that our fees are appropriate. And something that our board is very proud of, and it really is to the credit of our very dedicated department heads. In calendar year 2019, we secured $2.8 million in grant funding. $2 million of that was to dredge the harbor through the efforts of Harbor Master Corson. A couple $100,000 of grants with the fire department. We had Emily Wentworth spearheaded a grant for $140,000. So there was about $2.8 million of expenses where we were actually able to bring in federal and state dollars to put to work for us. I'd make one final point because it's come up. When the water company transaction is executed and the town owns the water company, it will not reduce our tax base. And the reason is that within the structure of the water company, we've set up a payment in lieu of taxes, which is the same thing we do for Hingham Light. Right now, Aquarian Water pays the town $830,000 a year in property taxes. Next year, the Weir River Water System, which is our new name for the water company, is going to be paying the town of Hingham $830,000 in a payment in lieu of taxes. And that will go up by 2.5% every year. So the purchase of the water company is not going to reduce that pie. We're just going to collect that money from a different place. In terms of operating expenses in the town, they're kind of 3 buckets. You've got municipal services, which is, general government, the town clerk, the treasurer, the assessor, the town accountant. We've got public safety, police, fire, dispatch, harbor master, public works, human services, which includes Board of Health. We've got elder services, council on aging, veteran services, culture and recreation, that's the library, it's recreation. We have education services and, whether that's regular ed, special ed, vocational ed, we'll hear a little bit more about that tonight. And then we also have a category of what I'm calling town-wide services. And these are really kind of budgets that Tom Mayo and Michelle manage on behalf of the town. But really both the municipal and the education services benefit from it. There's debt service. If we have debt for something, we don't put it in the school budget or put it in the police budget. We keep it all together, and that's actually about $7 million a year is our debt service. We have employee benefits, and that's both health insurance and its retirement obligations. We have something called unclassified, which is pretty much insurance on all of the assets in the town. And then we have capital outlay. About 75% of our costs are personnel. We are a people-intensive business. What I've done here, and I've got a handout because it's something that I started doing when I was on AdCom a long time ago, is these are just trends for those 3 buckets. So if you look in kind of the left-hand side of the screen, municipal, I'll start at the bottom with the red. Over the last 10 years, our budget has grown on average by 4.3% each year. On average, 4.3. And remember, in the last 10 years, our revenue was growing by a little over 4%. And that translated to about $3.6 million. You'll see that the growth rates, townwide expenses were growing at about 6% a year, education at 4.2, the municipal budget's at 3.1. If you look at the last 5 years, you see that the growth has, that it has slowed down. And again, that's because of slowing revenue growth. Townwide, our costs have been growing by an average of 3.1% a year, or just under $3 million. Our townwide costs have been about flat. A big reason for that was the switchover in insurance to the GIC. Our education budget's been growing by an average of 4.5% a year, and our municipal budgets have been growing on average each year by 2.6%. Then if you look in the last column, you'll see the last 3 years, which I think are a little bit more predictive of what's ahead. And you'll see, again, 3% you see the townwide costs have actually gone down. Our debt service has gone down in the last few years, as well as lower insurance rates. And so that's a little bit of some of the operating budget trends. Also thought it was interesting to just take a look and see how does the spending break out by those budget categories. And, you can see on the slide between 2011 and 2019, what percentage these three big buckets are of the total. I would also just direct your attention to the bottom. Looking at the 20-town benchmark comparison for 2018, you'll see that municipal expenditures for the 20 benchmark communities average 26.5%. Education is just under 50%, and townwide costs are about 24%. Looking ahead, you've already seen our 5-year forecast as of 1/29/20. And what I just did here was to show the sources of funds, the uses of funds, and then excess or surplus. And directing your attention to 2021, Tom mentioned that right now we have a $1.7 million deficit. If you look at the ensuing 4 years in the forecast, you see that that deficit actually grows. And again, that's where the forecast is right now. Now, for 22 and beyond, we forecast our revenue, and from a cost perspective, we assume that all of the municipal and education budgets are going to grow by 2%. It's just an assumption we make. And for townwide costs, we assume group insurance and healthcare is growing by 10% a year. And then we have 30-year funding schedules for pension, so we project that out. So I just want to show you one final thing here, which is a little bit of a sensitivity analysis. In scenario 1, we've said instead of the municipal and education budgets growing by 2%, what happens if they grow by 3%? Which is what they've been growing for the last 5 years. Well, that adds about $1 million to the deficit in each year. And I would also point out that there's a compounding effect to that. If you increase it by 2% or a total of 4%, the deficit, the additional deficit is 1.7 or 1.8 million. And if you grow those budgets by 5% over the next few years, you're pretty much doubling your deficit. So again, I think what it illustrates is that as we're looking at our revenue growth slowing down, and we're looking at some of the historical spending rates that we've been able to enjoy, those are going to be more challenging in the next several years. And as our board is working on things like, South Hingham and other things, those aren't solutions that are going to be in place in the next few years. Those are things that take time. We continue to work on them, but they take time. I'd leave you with one final budget consideration. We all know that there are many capital projects under consideration. Foster School and the wonderful news that we've been invited into the MSBA program. Fire stations, addressing space needs at Town Hall. I don't know if any of you see the Hingham Journal, but for the last 6 weeks, there's been at least one article every week from seniors who are reminding the community of the space needs at the senior center and the fact that 47% of our households have senior citizens living in them. And, if you look at our operating budget, the bottom line is that if we try to take these projects on, we just unfortunately can't fit them into our budget without reducing services. So that means that, as we've done in the past, if we're going to do some of those big projects, we're most likely going to need to ask the taxpayers of Hingham if they would allow us to raise their taxes for 20 years to pay the debt service on those projects. And the table that you see listed there just gives you a little bit of an idea of the tax impact of different borrowing. And so if you look at $50 million, if we were to borrow $50 million, on the average assessed value home in Hingham, which is $800,000, that's a $535 tax increase on top of the 2.5% increase that happens every year. So if you have the average assessed value home and the town were to borrow $50 million in a debt exclusion, your tax bill would go up by $750 in 1 year. And if we borrow $100 million, that number doubles. And so as, you know, as we're talking about budget and we're thinking about all of the wonderful capital projects that we have on the horizon, I would just leave us all with the importance of being sensitive to the cumulative taxpayer impact on all the decisions that we'll be making. So, thank you. No, okay.
It's kind of like a tutorial on municipal finance, I think.
Oh, so Joe just wanted to remind me, and thank you, Joe, because, you know, we've also had comments from people about the water company and the borrowing. Again, the purchase of the water company is going to be out of water rates. So it will not affect our capacity to borrow for municipal projects. It's not going to raise taxes. It's just like the country club that we talked about earlier. It's a separate entity, so there will be no impact. Thank you.
Joe, questions?
No, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, you know, I think one of the things I'll say before I open it up to questions is just, you know, at every level in the town, in town government, everybody goes kind of back to their budget and makes some tough choices, and that all kind of moves along the line until it comes back to the elected school committee and the elected board of selectmen, where those municipal budgets and education budgets then get kind of the final polish. And I think what you see tonight is an illustration of the balancing, I think, that, and the evaluation that needs to go on, and the careful stewardship of really each and every tax dollar. You know, and I think what Mary pointed out when Kevin Whalen was up earlier to talk about the turf care center at the country club and the estimated borrowing rate that our financial advisors have suggested we use, which is 3.5%, when in actuality the town's borrowing at 1.4%. The reason the town can borrow at 1.4% and has access to the capital markets, you know, in that very favorable way is because we're a AAA rated community. And we're a AAA rated community because we all together go through this exercise. So this is not easy work, but it is something that we undertake every year. And this is, you know, we started the budget process on the municipal side. We will hear from the school committee tonight on the school budget. But I think this was a very helpful analysis and framework for, I think, all of us to think about the responsibility really that you've entrusted to us to balance the priorities of the town within a metric and a financial framework that respects, I think, the taxpayers of Hingham. So, Michelle, comments or questions with respect to the presentation?
It was great, really helpful. Thank you for Mary and to the board for putting that all together, and for Tom and Sue and Michelle. I think really helpful to sort of put it into perspective what we're all dealing with as, you know, townspeople and as officials of the town, and to your point of what our stewardship is. So I don't know if you want to take questions from...
Sure, from your school committee, sure.
Or anyone.
Questions from school committee colleagues? Liza?
So thank you, Liza O'Reilly, 19 Porter's Cove Road. I appreciate this presentation. We've heard similar ones before, and I have a question. So this shows us where we are. And this is also a question to the advisory committee. We've been talking about these challenges for several years, and we've been talking about this in the town warrants for several years. Back in 2017, there was, at the beginning of the advisory committee write-up, it says, while the financial position of the town is solid, balancing the budget was challenging once again this year. Slower revenue growth continues, and structural higher expense increases are embedded in the budget. the advisory committee has recommended to the Board of Selectmen that a long-term financial management plan be developed in order to prepare for the impact of these trends," unquote. A very similar paragraph was in the 18 and 19 warrants. Another paragraph in that same message said, quote, "While the municipal and school departments worked through the financial constraints of the last several budget cycles with limited disruption in services, increasing service demands and unfunded federal and state mandates require the allocation of additional dollars to meet the most pressing needs. Unfunded mandates will continue to influence future budgets, especially as it relates to the education budget. The advisory committee remains especially concerned about the chronic underfunding and delayed reimbursement from the Commonwealth of special education, out-of-district tuition, and transportation costs." That same paragraph was repeated in the 18 and 19 warrants. And then in the advisory committee meeting minutes of May 9th, 2017, and I will note there are 5 current members that were at that meeting. There was a discussion about the new financial planning group that was formed to start addressing the capital projects. Also in those meeting minutes, it said, quote, "AdCom Education Subcommittee members clarified that the genesis for this working group proposal came from concern about operating level services budgets where expense growth exceeds sustainable revenue." So my question, and we'll hear more tonight as we present more, but my question to the Board of Selectmen is, we've been talking about establishing this financial plan to really address this challenge. And can we start really making a plan and prioritizing as you're going to hear our challenges tonight, and I know the municipal side has challenges as they're shown in these deficits. But can tonight be the beginning of really coming up with a plan and to begin prioritizing how we're going to tackle what the community wants in services and what we're capable of, and what are the potential solutions? Because there are other solutions than just sticking with this revenue forecast. So that's what I would appreciate us all thinking about tonight, and especially after hearing this part of the presentation. That's where I am. I've been hearing this for many years, we all have, and there was an interest from the advisory committee members to actually establish a plan. And so, and I think together we can come up with a plan, but I'd like us all to begin that process.
So I'd just like to respond to that. And we have been talking about doing this and had a financial working group that put together some modeling that was very helpful and that has informed some of these decisions. Last year, I think every week when I sat down with Donna Smallwood, she would say to me, well, what about that long-term financial plan? And my response at the time was, until we find out whether we're getting into the MSBA program with Foster School, I don't think it's worth putting together a financial plan, because the difference to me in a school that is MSBA funded versus a school project that we'd have to go alone, that to me is such a big game changer in any sort of a financial plan, that my thought was, let's wait until we hear from Foster School. Is Foster School going to be a $40 million project for the town, or 80, or whatever it was? At the same time, this year, as many of you know, this is a big year for a lot of master planning that's going on. We've got wonderful master plans going on with recreation, with the town, with affordable housing, And our thought as a board, when we talked about our goals, over the summer, was let's wait and see what we hear with Foster School, and let's see what comes out of a lot of this, financial planning work. So I think there is a shared goal to do more long-term planning. And I think that we made some conscious choices based on some pretty big pieces of information that we thought could really inform it. And I think we're, getting a lot of that master plan work done this year.
Right.
And then now we have an answer with Foster School, which is very helpful. So that was that, people may disagree, but that was, I just want to explain the rationale,
Okay. I just as far, I agree that Foster was a priority. Yes, we have an answer. I just don't want to wait too long because as a member of the master plan, there was a quote from the visioning sessions about Hingham and making changes. And it said, quote, "If there's agreement, great. If you're trying to change something, you will literally age in place." So I hope we don't wait too long, and so we're not all aging in place. So thank you.
Thank you. Any, Victor, any further questions from the school committee with respect to the presentation? Victor, questions from your group, from you?
Anyone with questions? Libby, yes.
Libby Claypool, 10 Shipyard Drive. The only thing I would say is that what I'm hearing is a bit of a gap, because I'm hearing the question, sounds to me, was more of the, how do we bridge that operating gap between the revenue growth and the expense growth, that disconnect. And what I heard here was more about the capital project long-term planning. So I still think we have to get all that wrapped up together, because what I heard the question and the answer were operating versus capital. So.
Hang on, Liza. Hang on. You got to be recognized by the chair. So hang on.
So that's just, I guess, a comment, question.
Okay.
I don't know.
I would
from what I
just-
heard.
Yeah, Libby, 3 years ago when that came up, there was a discussion with, there was a discussion around how do we start to bite this off? Because absolutely, do we have to do long-term capital planning? Do we have to do long-term financial planning? We got to do them both. Where do we start? And the thought was, given that there were all these large capital projects right on the horizon, and that would be an appropriate starting point. So that's where the effort started. I'd also say that this year, as we were setting our goals, we actually got the readout from the advisory committee meeting where all of you discussed kind of this concept and what long-term planning meant and what it looked like. And there were a lot of very good and very different views on what it looks like. So as we move forward with this, I would see a logical starting point as where do we start? Because I think long-term financial planning can mean different things to different people.
Right.
We're not opposed to doing the work.
Yeah,
but
I totally realize that, and I just wanted to clarify so everybody's sort of thinking about the big picture, is that what I heard here was operating, what I heard here is capital, and we've got to, get that, the left hand talking to the right hand and making sure that that long-term financial plan is incorporating everything. That's my only.
I would also just say that, again, I think one very hard thing to do that all of us as volunteers and interested citizens, and we've got a lot of really civic-minded people in this audience, it's always hard to sort of say, where do you start, what do you do? I have a vision that when the town gets up to ask the community about building a new foster school, people are going to say, how is this going to fit? How does this relate to other capital projects? So to me, I think about the first decision to go before town meeting and back up from there. But
well, I guess I would say, too, I do see them bundled, as you're suggesting, because I think changes in our physical plant drive further operating costs. So, to say we're going to build and open a new school, to hopefully open other facilities on the town side, to me, I think I think the capital piece informs the operating piece. Now, certainly we have operating challenges now, but I think the long-term planning also has to be informed by what our capital plan is.
Yeah, absolutely, and I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't nothing was getting lost in translation, that's
Yeah,
all.
and I guess I would just add that as an outgrowth of the discussion that our advisory committee colleagues have, there is actually a warrant article before us that would begin to assess what the town facilities are, so that we have a starting point for, at least identifying what we own and what condition it's in and what it's being used for, so that we can also talk about synergies across, town-controlled versus school-controlled assets. I don't know about you all, but from the outside looking in, right, this is the town. So I think that if we have assets that can be used in common, we ought to be finding those efficiencies, so.
And I would say as a 10-year member of Capital Outlay, and if you look back at warrants, that's something that we've been asking for years, so nobody was more thrilled than me to see that warrant article.
No, and
It's finally getting the, I guess, attention at the highest levels of the town where they're willing to proceed with it, because certainly we've been sort of, preaching about that for years, so I was very happy that that's an article this year. So.
Right, and I take the comment, and I think I've made the comment, that I think that, the wheels of town government turn very methodically, and I get that, and I get that there's impatience, but there's a public process piece of this, there are statutes that require processes that take time. It's not as if we're not all working, and we take these issues very seriously, and appreciate your comments. So I get it. It's slow, but we're trying.
Thank you.
So. You need to respond through the chair to me, okay? If you'd like to, but you need to direct your question here, or your comment here.
May I?
Yes, absolutely.
Libby.
Okay, this is what you need to talk to me, and then I can talk to Libby. That's the way this works.
Okay. I'd just like to clarify what she interpreted my statement to be. I was not just talking about operating. I was talking about operating and capital.
Okay.
The whole plan.
I agree with you. Yep, thank you. Did you want to say anything?
No, I think lost in this discussion is the fact that this board has been very active, looking to the future, looking to where future development's going to be, spending a lot of time. South Hingham is an area where there's going to be potential growth. There's a planning process going on, so it's not as if we're just hoping that something's going to happen. We're working actively to make sure that not only it happens, but it happens in a way that benefits the residents of Hingham.
Right, and I think we also have to be mindful of the neighborhood of South Hingham, right? So, as Mary said, you think about these big projects that we have, and then really just our shrinking footprint of developable land. And so, you sort of gravitate there because that's where the land is. Well, there are people that live up there, and there are people that live up there that are already burdened by the Derby Street shops and the traffic in the 53 corridor and the Derby Street corridor. So one of the things, as Mary pointed out, was the South Hingham Study Group actually put together just a very, very comprehensive report. I think that the process took a couple of years. Paul Healy, I'm sorry, I keep spitting into my microphone. Paul Healy was the representative from the Board of Selectmen that served as part of that committee. But it laid the groundwork and the metrics to evaluate development there, so that, when you talk about traffic impacts, for instance, there's actually a framework within that South Hingham Study Group report that talks about that. I mean, many of us do drive that corridor. The state improvement to the roadway, the exit off Derby Street coming south notwithstanding, I'm like, whose idea was that? I think the improvement to the roadway was one of those pieces we had to get in place. Before then, we could do some additional planning. Joe's right. I think we are, and Joe now is the liaison to that development effort. It's undertaking, comprehensive conversations with the folks that own that property. They're private developers, but we're trying to get, not trying, we're getting in front of them to talk globally about uses and schedules and, development plans to be certain that that aligns with, kind of the town's vision and the town's, frankly, concerns for additional development in that quadrant. So, and that stuff takes a lot of time. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes meetings. We, as you all know, we're liaisons to a number of different efforts in town, and those conversations have been ongoing, through all of this. So.
I sometimes like to say that people in Hingham like really great services, really nice stuff. They want low taxes and no more development. And, part of our collective challenge is how to figure out, kind of how to pull those levers in the varying degree. And, the hope is that as we go through a cycle with town meeting and the budget, whether it's a warrant article or a budget, that every kind of constituency in Hingham feels like I'm going to be a little better off this next year than I was the last year. And, we were here voting CPC a little earlier. It's really kind of finding that whole balance that brings a lot of us here tonight. And, I think that the taxpayers of Hingham are counting on us all to help figure that out and to listen to them along the way.
Right. Further questions from the school committee? Victor, questions from your group?
Anyone else?
Questions from the public with regard to the town revenue and expense analysis? Yes, ma'am. Name and address, if you would, for the record.
Hi, Leslie Whitman, 1 Rocky Run. Sorry, a little head cold here, but I am fairly new to understanding this process, but one thing that strikes me is that our personal tax, property tax rate has been going down. Can you just explain why that is? And maybe everyone here knows that, except me.
I think I saw a member of the Board of Assessors in the audience, and I'm not going to call her out, but so what happens every year is that our revenue base can only grow by 2.5%. And Sue? Yes. Can you do this? Because you can do a better job than I can about the tax rate.
As values go up, taxes go down.
Tax rate.
The tax rate goes down, because it's a bigger pie.
So it's a function, it's not just the tax rate, it's a function of valuations and the tax rate.
So the dollars don't go down, it's the percentage.
Right.
The dollars grow by the whole pie grows by 2.5%, but if the assessed value grows by greater than 2.5%, the rate goes
gets
down.
nicked. It's a good question, though, because when you look at it, you think, oh, well, that's the answer, right? But not so easy, I guess. Further questions with respect to the town revenue and expense analysis? Yes, ma'am. Name and address, if you could.
Sarah Ader from 32 Highview Drive, and I'm curious about the 47%, I think you said, senior citizen statistic. I think it's misleading because I think it's a 50 and above. So you're not looking at people who are looking for senior services at that rate. I think that the 65 and above is really where you get the senior services. So I just would want you to clarify that, because I think it's rather misleading to say that it's, or insinuate that it's senior citizens at that level. Sounds like Del Boca Vista, and I don't think Hingham is really in that category. I think this is a growing town with young families and young kids, and I think that if we say that half our population is senior citizens, it's a little confusing. It doesn't really seem accurate, so I'm just wondering where you get that statistic and how that works.
Sure. Do you want to clarify that? Or?
I'm going off the top of my head here, so I may not have the percentage exactly right, but in the South Hingham Study Group report that was commissioned a few years ago, there were 2 pie charts that showed 2010 and 2020. And if my memory serves me right, 47% in the year 2020, 47% of Hingham households will have a family member age 65 or older. I'm happy to send everybody that slide after, but that was from the South Hingham Study Group report.
I mean, I guess what it says to me, you know, whether it's, you know, closer to a third even, it's just, you know, that's a demographic that we have to consider, you know, just like schools, just like the middle class. Like, it's just another metric that I think that informs our decision-making.
I think it conflicts with the census.
Okay, and I think my colleague has said we will certainly clarify that information. Thank you for the question. Further questions on the town revenue and expense analysis? Libby?
As a community member.
Sure.
Libby Lewicki, 370 Gardner Street. And again, I'm speaking on my member of the community hat rather than my school committee hat. I'd like to just sort of suss out the community's feelings towards an override, because we're presenting it as though we can't increase taxes more than 2.5%. But the fact is we can if we vote for it. And so I'm just wondering how the community feels about that and how close we might be, and that could be a potential solution.
Thank you. I guess where I'm sitting tonight, that's not something I'm prepared to discuss. If my colleagues have comments, I think we started this process, the three of us started this process, not advocating for an operational override. If the advisory committee evaluates the budget and comes to a different conclusion, then that's a different discussion. But the budget that we intend to recommend to town meeting is a budget within the levy and the figures that are presented, unless I'm misstating.
For the last 3 years, when we've talked about our budget assumptions as we make the budget, we have asked ourselves a couple questions. Do we want to use the unused levy capacity? And is this the pie? Do we want to have an override? And in a public meeting, we've had those discussions. Personally, when I look at $100 million of capital on the horizon that's going to have to be paid for with debt exclusions, I think the citizens of Hingham are going to be asked for some pretty significant tax increases in the next 5 years. I really do. I do really worry about how much we can push people, and what I hear from people is that it's not that I don't want to support all these things, it's that I can't.
Well, and I guess what I would respond to is I do see in the very near term significant ask from the community for debt exclusions. So in some ways, it's an override, right? Because it's debt outside the levy that we would be asking them to increase their taxes by. And then what follows from there, as I said to Libby, so now you have these new capital, you have these new buildings, this new stuff you're undertaking. Is that the point we reevaluate the pie? So I think for me, in the short term, I already know there's going to be a tax increase. And so I'd like to tackle that first, and then I'd like to reassess where, if it were up to me, then I would reassess where we are. But thank you for the question. Okay, I think we're ready to move to the school budget presentation. Thank you.
I'll just make a couple remarks. Can I make them from here? While Dr. Austin is setting up. All right, so Dr. Austin, you can start getting ready. So the demographic and financial information that the board presented here tonight was actually great, because it really illustrated what Dr. Austin and the school committee will highlight tonight, that there are significant needs in our town and in our schools, and so we need to find a way to ensure that the needs of all the townspeople and all of our students are met.
Before we proceed, can everyone hear her?
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. And just to be clear, when we say that we want to meet the needs of all students, it's not just a nice soundbite for the mission of the Hingham Public Schools. It is a requirement of the law to provide a free and appropriate public education that meets the needs of all students. And these needs that we're going to talk about tonight, most of them are not new. Prior to Dr. Austin joining the district, Dr. Gallo had also highlighted many of these needs for enhanced services that would meet the needs of students. We are incredibly fortunate in this town that we do have a town that values education, and we're extremely grateful to the support we receive from the town, so we don't want that to go without being said. It's certainly not something that we take for granted. And we appreciate that there are lots of needs that the town needs, and there are resources that are limited. We really do get that, and we appreciate it. So I guess what we're not here tonight to suggest that we get more so that others get less. It's not our intention nor our desire. What we want to do tonight is to explain what the school department needs to provide our students with an appropriate education that meets state and federal guidelines. We aren't looking for bells and whistles. We aren't padding the budget. We aren't looking for state-of-the-art technology. That ship has passed, unfortunately, for our schools. We aren't looking to have the highest per pupil spend. We aren't even looking, honestly, for everything we need to do, because we know that that's another number for a whole other meeting that this town would have to have. We're just here tonight to explain what we need, why we need it, and what the consequences are when we can't fully fund the school budget. So we know we're not going to solve the budget woes tonight. They are deep and they are long, but we think that we can just leave here tonight with a better understanding, with some better information, and at least just leave here with a commitment to try to leave this place a little better than we all found it when we got here. So, with that, Dr. Austin.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for members of the Select Board and the Advisory Committee and the School Committee, as well as members of the audience. This is like a town meeting in Maine. So I feel right at home. Actually, it's a little larger than a town meeting in Maine, so I feel sort of at home. And I want to echo some of Michelle Ayer's comments that we are incredibly appreciative of the support the town has afforded the school system over the years. It's not a difficult task to take on. There are a lot of needs and they continue to grow. And I can appreciate, I think, one of the statements you said, when there are new things that have to be done, you can't absorb them in the budget unless something else gets cut, and I think that's exactly where we're at. And so we're often taxed with the, if we're going to add something, then what goes, and that's hard to kind of determine at this time, and that we haven't been able to find that place. I think that's where we all start. And so my task as we created this budget, and I'm grateful that we're near I think it's been about 5 months since we started, so it's been a very long process. So I'm glad we're funneling it down and getting closer to the end, and I'm very happy with that. I also want to say thank you to the administrators who have worked really hard on this budget, John Ferris in particular, and the principals who have probably I've had to lay on a little bit harder than in previous years because I am new to the system and learning the lay of the land. As hard as I've worked over the last year to be just about everywhere I can be in town at all times, which is hard to do, and learn the system, we still have to rely on people to come together and advise on this budget. And so thank you for that. I'll run through the slides and hopefully this will be fairly quick, but I can't guarantee it. So first one is we always start with, since our students are the core of our budget, our mission and core beliefs are the mission of Hingham Public Schools is provide challenging and comprehensive educational programs in a safe and supportive environment, enabling all students to develop the knowledge and skills necessary for success as local and global citizens. We believe that in the fulfillment of individual potential, respect for self and others, civic responsibility, commitment to lifelong learning, and service to others. So as I said, the students are absolutely the core of why we're here, and we start with that to build our budget. Now, you can tell we're educators because I don't care how many times, and thank you very much for pointing this out, we get educators, no matter how many people I've had actually look at this and vet my writing or what we put up, guiding principles is actually LES, not with PALS. So I'm embarrassed to say I'm not an English teacher, and thank goodness, but I appreciate all the principals out there. I know they're many who are here tonight. So we do have guiding principles, and we'll fix that next time we look around. But anyway, so when the school committee met in the fall, they directed me that we would adopt a budget that would reflect our district mission, our school committee priorities, and community expectations for excellence and equitable access to education for all students. We would reflect the known contractual obligations along with an allowance for negotiations with our 5 operating budget collective bargaining units. Oh, we had 6. Somehow I got changed 5. Provide for continued personnel support for central office administration, in particular in the human resource area. We're going to fund state and federal mandates in compliance with DESE and Department of Public Health regulations. We're going to fund the maintenance of and capital improvement to our school buildings, fields, playgrounds, and properties. fund our projected utilities and energy costs and contracted services such as those for transportation, preventative maintenance projects, and proactive assessment and planning for facilities and space needs. And we would reflect the gross cost as they are known as or projected, but then offset by anticipated local fees and revenues, state and federal grants, including the Massachusetts Circuit Breaker and IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and revolving account allocations. So just as I start the budget, the budget development notes. So when we looked at this budget and we began the process for a proposed budget, we addressed it to address the following needs. One is, and first and foremost, and they are in order, the needs of our students, first and foremost. Second is the mission and vision of the school district. Then the third is the priorities set by the school committee. The needs is determined by the district, school administration, and staff, and then the needs and expectations of the community. And I'll say before I start this, you know, this budget starts with lots of people asking for lots of different things, just like I'm sure on the town side. People ask for everything, and if I brought you a budget tonight, I don't think you'd let me leave without damage to myself in person, but we're not going to do that. And so we understand that there are lots of needs out there, and lots of people contact me just like they contact you about what needs to go in the budget. I do my best, as you do, to try to stay focused and remain clear on the budget, and so we stay with the needs of the students. So this budget was developed with that in mind. So I want to give you a little overview of where we are today about our student enrollment and our makeup. From a 10-year enrollment perspective, enrollment is trending upward, and since 2011, the student population has risen by 169 students, which represents a 4% increase in overall student body. Since 2011, the high school enrollment has increased by 206 students, which represents an 18.8% increase in the grades 9 through 12 student body. This has put a strain on office support, administration, and class size in all content areas. We just actually did a class size analysis, and we're sitting just below 20 right now for our average core content courses at the high school. For FY20, 9 Hingham students had attended or are attending a regional vocational technical school, and at present we anticipate 8 students, 8 of those 9 will continue for FY21. However, that number in the budget, and you'll see it later, it's actually a little bit lower than last year or this FY20. There are applications for FY21 remain open, and there are 3 outstanding applications at this time, so I will wait to see if they actually get accepted, and if they are, we'll have to fund those, so that'll change. In the enrollment study completed by NESDEC in 2018, Hingham Public Schools K-12 enrollments, they said that Hingham K-12 enrollments are likely to continue to maintain the present pace of growth, supported by additional residential construction, some of the things that you've been talking about, and their greatest growth is projected in grades K through 5 through 27-28, and elementary classes are expected to grow as construction of single-family homes, and especially condos and apartments, are expected to be strong in the foreseeable future. Again, this was a study done in 2018. So this is our enrollment data, just a couple of slides on enrollment data, and you can see down here, and I'll do my best to point at it here. In 2011, we were at 4154 overall. This year, and I'm not as young as I used to be, 4323 in 2020. And so the trend is moving upwards. And then you can see the bottom slide is actually the trend from the high school, which was in 2011 was just over 1,000 students. To today, we're at 1304 as of this year in 2020. I have some other things, but they're a little small for me to see from here, I'll be honest. But you can tell our makeup of our student body as well as the ratio of male to female. So a little bit about student performance data, because that's what the school committee has certainly taxed me with to continue our program of excellence. The students at Hingham Public Schools have a long history of academic and extracurricular excellence. Our students are exceptional in many ways, from their performance in the classroom, on the stage, on the athletic fields, and in the community. Our public schools have worked extensively to create and support rigorous curricula that meet the needs of all learners. Our teachers strive to understand and meet the individual needs of every student while promoting individual growth, perseverance, and a lifelong love of learning. Hingham students have consistently scored well above the state average on state assessments. For grades K through 8 in 2019, 83% of our students met or exceeded state expectations in English language arts, and 74% met or exceeded state standard expectations in math. Overall, Hingham Public Schools has long been one of the highest performing districts in the state, and our schools have earned both local and national recognition. Despite our exceptional overall performance on the MCAS, one of our challenges is that the performance of high-need students, these are students with disabilities, English language learners, former English language learners, and are economically disadvantaged. You have to have at least one of those categories to be considered a high-need student, is substantially lower than their same-age peers, particularly in the area of math. In 2019, just 48% of our high-need students in grades 3 through 8 met or exceeded state expectations in ELA, while just 41% met or exceeded expectations in math. So that obviously is an area of concern for us. Hingham students perform better than 85 to 99% overall of the students in Massachusetts. While overall performance in the MCAS was exceptional in all schools, I will point out that chronic absenteeism, which is students missing more than 18 days per year, negatively impacts our percentiles. So school administrators are educating parents about this challenge. So on one of the slides, I'll explain that when we go on to the next one, where you see our percentiles that range from 93 at the elementary to 99. What's really impacting that number is the number of kids that are out over 18 days per year. And so that's impacting us, and I want you to be aware of that. And then the performance of our highest performing students continues to be very strong, and it leads the way in comparison to our benchmark communities. Maintaining this strong performance is a top priority, but we must also ensure that every student has the supports and services necessary to meet their full potential as well. So these are the MCAS results that I talked about. This is just one slide, and then the MCAS report is 100 pages long, so I won't go into that for you tonight. But I'm sure that Dr. LaBelle would certainly do that for you at any time. But you can see at Hingham High School, as we go to the top, 80% of our students meet or exceed targets, and these are overall. So this takes your whole student body, including students with high needs. We are at the 98th percentile overall in accountability, so when we take all those measures together and as we, with attendance and all those other things, discipline and all things put together, we end up at the 98th percentile, meaning that we outperform 98% of the districts in the Commonwealth. This is true in middle school. That's 61% of substantial progress towards targets, which is the 85th percentile. They are very different from the middle school, so it's hard to compare. They're our own set of, their own entity of scores, but it is something we continue to watch, and actually that is growth over the last year as well. East Elementary School, 92% of our students meet or exceeds targets. We're at the 94th percentile. Foster Elementary, 91% of our students meet or exceed targets, which is 99th percentile, and actually was a school of distinction this year that was recognized by the state. Plymouth River, 91% of our students meet or exceed targets, which is 93rd percentile, and South Elementary School is 93% meet or exceed and 99th percentile. So when you look at this column here, particularly at the elementary, you see a pretty tight spiral of 91, 92, 93. There's not much difference because somebody's always asking me, well, why are we 93 over here and 99? That's a huge difference. That's what we're talking about in chronic absenteeism. So in areas that we're very much lower here, it's because the students are absent. And so we have to address that with families and try to educate them to not take them out when they don't have to. So when we go down, just quickly, so this group here are the high needs, and then this would be students with disabilities, but I want to talk mainly about high needs for a minute. So when you compare our scores up above, like at the high school at 80%, et cetera, 90s in the elementary, we look down here to third grade. So we have 90, at 90 some odd percent meeting or exceeding targets. But then you look at our subgroups, we're at 43% in reading, 38% in math. And it goes down, that's very consistent. 38s and 30s and the 40s is very consistent through our elementary grades. Goes up slightly in some areas at the middle school, but again, we can see in 8th grade math in particular, 31% of our students, only 31% of our students in the areas of math are meeting or exceeding expectations. So we have 69% who are not. So obviously that's a challenge for us to move forward. And I want to point out one more thing, I'm sorry, before I move that on. 10th grade in particular, if you look at the areas of math, particularly at 10th grade, 34% are meeting or exceeding standards compared to a state average of 33%. We're barely above the state average. That is not true in every other category. And we certainly, when you look at the way that we outperform when it comes to students overall, we're substantially higher than the state average on almost every other thing until we get down to high need students, where we're slightly above state average, but certainly not where we'd expect to be in comparison. And what that told me in a very quick time is that we need to pay more attention to students with high needs. I also want to point out, as I just said, with our students that perform incredibly well on our high level, these are our AP exams. So these are our benchmark towns. I think they're probably the same ones that you use, would be my guess. These are our 19 benchmark towns. Our students perform at the very top of that. And that's an exciting number because not only are we at the top of our benchmark towns, but then we just hear that now Massachusetts is the top in the nation when it comes to AP. So when you think about that, our students are outperforming all of our benchmarks, and we're the best in the country. Our students are really doing well. We should be very proud of them. I also want to show you this piece here. There are 20 AP classes that are offered at the high school. 47% of them, of our seniors, so almost half of our seniors, took 280 AP exams. In total, 255 students took 472 exams. And down here is our performance on those exams, and you can see them over the years. But as we look to 2019 in this column here, 94% of our students are going on to post-secondary, which is incredibly good, well above state averages. And so we have very few students. We have 91 that go to four-year colleges, 2.6% that go to junior colleges, 1.1 that go to prep schools, and then employment is only 2.9%, which is obviously something that we continue to monitor, how many are going directly to employment. So our students at the top level are doing incredibly well, and we want to maintain that. Just a quick overview of special ed, because that's a big part of the budget, just to let you know where we are. So as of January 1 of 2019, the public schools had 622 students identified for special education services, and this includes 575 students receiving supports and services in one of the district schools, and an additional 47 enrolled in out-of-district programs. And as of January 1 this year, 2020, we had 631 students identified for special education services, which included 587 students receiving supports and services in one of the district schools, and 44 now enrolled in an out-of-district program, so we've actually reduced that number. Our special education programs provide a continuum of services to children with disabilities in all levels, pre-K through 12, through early childhood services for our learning centers, to our RISE programs, which is Reaching Independence through structured education, our language academic home bases, comprehensive learning centers at the middle school, co-taught classes at middle school, high school, RISE courses at the high school, supported learning centers and academic strategies in grades 9 through 12 at the high school, post-secondary transition services for those students who are postgraduate in ages 18 to 22, which we're by law required to provide services to, and then related services such as speech, language, OT, physical therapy, etc. It's a productive, very large part of our district, and there are a lot of needs, and they do a great job of trying to meet those needs. This is just a quick snapshot of our enrollment in special education, and you can see since 2011 there has been a slight increase. I think we were at, if I could see the numbers there, we're at 13.75% here, up to now we're a little over 14% identification. And this category here, you can see the breakdown, and it's in your slide too, so I won't go over each one, but it breaks down the types of services and disabilities that we're dealing with. So in the budget breakdown for FY21, we see that the teaching services of the special education budget takes up about 60, I think it's 62%, and then counseling and psychological services takes 6%, transportation is 7%, and then tuitions are looks like 25% of the overall budget. So our facilities challenges, and we've talked a little bit about them already. So our aging infrastructure and equipment are no longer a growing concern, but they do need immediate attention, something that the capital outlay group has already heard. At the high school, we have significant concern about our boilers. They are in need, both in need of extensive repair, and so that needs to be addressed immediately. We have rooftop units that need to be replaced, and we certainly need to have a plan to do that fairly soon in the immediate future. At Foster School, as you'd mentioned, we're very happy to be in the pipeline of the MSBA, and the balance of the Foster Extraordinary Maintenance Capital is sufficient for FY21. So that's good news. We don't have to do more there. The Plymouth River, we know that the older windows are rusting and eroding away, and our statement of interest with the MSBA is an option we want to pursue, but we need to plan obviously, if that's not accepted, what do we do if that doesn't get accepted? South School and the high school both need major exterior and mechanical work. We need to plan for roof replacements in the future. And then space needs, as someone else has already pointed out, and preventative maintenance. Building 179 and 12 are no longer operational. They need immediate attention to ensure space for our Traces program and robotics. The Kids in Action program has no classroom space for growth, and it's not able to meet a public demand. We have people on waiting lists and then go other places. Central office has inadequate office space. We have people in alcoves right now doing the best they can to do their job without private space. Special education spaces across the district, as the needs continue to grow, is a huge concern for us. There's just simply no place to put it. And then the cost of preventative maintenance is rising sharply as some of our challenges. This is you mentioned much of this in your presentation, Select Member Powers. Where we see overall, this is the growth in the budget since 2011. We are at, as you said, and I probably have a slide in this, about 4.5% overall in the last few years. So we're going to start a little bit into historical funding and status quo budget increase. I don't know if you've heard status quo budgets before or level services. My status quo budget means just to keep things as they are today without any real changes any way up or down, just to keep things at a level service that we have, not adding to it. So it's a pure status quo. Start me with just what I have to do right now. So that's what I prefer as status quo or prefer to put to you. So the average increase since 2012, as I said, has been 4.43. That matches your numbers for the most part. The average increase over the past 5 years is 4.55%. The approved FY20 budget was $54,319,826. The FY21 status quo budget, these are the things required to meet the needs of our students and to fulfill federal and state mandates just as they are today, is $56,730,985. This is an increase of $2,411,159, or 4.44%. That's where we have to start on our base. This is just to address mandatory salary adjustments. We had to have an allowance for our negotiations and our required contractual services. That brings us to 4.44. So we all know the challenge because we know that the average has been right in that range for the last several years. We're already there before we even think about adding anything to it. And we're respectful of that. We understand. So I want to talk about the FY21 budget notes regarding the format. So the FY21 budget that I present tonight is in a tiered system, in a tier 1, 2, and 3 format, designed to express our needs in a prioritized manner. So tier 1 would be our most critical, tier 2 are highly critical, and tier 3 is the critical. So tier 1 is obviously the most critical things. These are, just so that you're aware that, these represent the present and most immediate, all three areas, the most present and most immediate critical needs of our students and district, and it was prioritized by the administrative team. So order of business, we have all these requests. I go through those with the individual administrators. We take some stuff out and say, okay, here's what we have left. I brought them all into a room and said, here's everything everybody wanted. Let's figure out from a group what we need on that tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. They did a fantastic job. I would also tell you that tier 1 to tier 3, that is incredibly fluid. It's not like there's a lot of difference between them. So where we go to tier 1, there's not a big bump down to say, okay, that would be really nice to have tier 2. They're pretty much neck and neck, but we have to understand we have to prioritize somewhere. So I would say all things that I've put in tier 1, 2, and 3 are things that we truly do need. These are not wants. These are not 10 years out. These are things that I need to open up schools on September 2nd. So all 3 tiers are necessary to address the most pressing needs of our students, the efficient operations of the district, the priorities set by the school committee, and the mission and vision of the Hingham Public Schools. So in the FY proposed budget with Tier 1, these are the most critical needs. This is the budget you've seen, the 6.15. The Tier 1 critical needs budget includes those supports and services above the status quo budget that are most critical in meeting the needs of all students. This budget includes the essential services necessary to provide equitable supports for all students who are struggling to meet state expectations, as evidenced by substantially lower performance of high-need students. The necessary services to allow expansions of our pre-K program to meet state requirements is evidenced by our challenge in creating inclusive classrooms in pre-K, which is something we're struggling with right now. And we think if we expand that, we can expand that, and so we can come into compliance. I just had a phone call with the ESE on this just the other day, and they certainly want us to work on creating better compliance. The needed support to ease administrative demand due to the enrollment increases at the high school. The reality is that we have 300 more students. We have not added to the administrative or the support staff to that, and that's taken its toll. And so that's the reality there. The needed increase to STEM opportunities at the middle school based upon student requests for these programs, and the necessary increase for human resources for the district. So our Tier 1 critical needs budget equals those things in Tier 1 are $930,743 over the status quo budget, which would create a budget of $57,661,728, an increase of $3,341,902 over FY20, which is the 6.15% that you've included in your forecast. So we move into, this is the FY21 tier, just Tier 1 supports, just so we can give you the list of what it looks like. That's the full funding of the Human Resource Director, which has been at 0.75 in the last budget, so it does increase it by the 0.25. We do have contracted public relations for communications. That has been a big issue for parents and the demand for additional communications for us. We've put in for STAR 360 student assessment and professional development. That's actually to address some of those higher need students so we can continue to monitor and be able to identify quicker and be able to provide services at a faster pace. Integrated preschool paraeducator, integrated preschool teacher, special education teacher for East, which is 0.5. And then this is the area down here as we get into the elementary math tutors and math specialists. That will address our HTSS academic to address those high need students that we were talking about and giving them support. We need, because of numbers at Foster, we have the need for 2 more elementary paraeducators in order to meet the needs for particularly special education. We have a high school administrative secretary in here. I'll also say I know historically, from what I've been told. And so everything I say is, I don't know everything. I've done my best to try to figure it out in the last few months. But I believe that was taken out, a secretary that was removed from the budget during the down years, I think somewhere in the 2008, 2009, from what I understand, and was never put back in the budget. And so this would put it back in the budget to support the assistant principals. We have a high school special education teacher, which is required due to our numbers and our understaffing at the high school in special ed. Middle school math specialist, again, addressing those needs of high need students, and as well as middle school math tutors, and then middle school grade 7-8 STEM teacher that I just mentioned, which makes up the $930,743. So we go into Tier 2 now, and I'm giving you this is the needs, again, as I see them. And we didn't include any other budget sheets. We gave you the 6.15, just about what you've had, but I think it's important that you understand, or at least hear from me, what the needs are. So the Tier 2 highly critical needs budget includes those supports and services above the status quo budget with Tier 1 additions that are highly critical for meeting the needs of students. And it includes the addition of building level leadership in special education and fine arts. These programs are necessary to ensure adequate programming and a rigorous diverse, engaging curriculum for all students. We know the standards, particularly in the areas of fine arts, have changed in the Commonwealth, and we will have those needs to be able to build new curriculum and support students in a different way moving forward. And so that's an essential position. It's an increase of 1 guidance counselor at the high school to address the needs of students due to the increased enrollment. It's getting more difficult to get to the guidance counselor. The fact is that all of our schools are building with the needs of students on the emotional side of things, and so it is taxing that department, and they truly need an additional guidance counselor. The expansion of elementary music and middle school art teaching positions. Now, to be fair, those are both .2 positions. They're moving them from .8 to .2. So it's not full positions, but it brings them up to full time to meet to make sure that we have equitable offerings for all of our schools, and the addition of 2 unified sports coaching positions to address program growth and needs. So again, we added in a couple of years ago the unified sports. That continues to grow in popularity, and to bring in equitable, we have lots of coaches who are doing the regular side of our athletic programs, and I believe this would be more equitable in supporting the students through the unified sports. So overall, the Tier 2, the highly critical needs budget, those items total $342,195 over the status quo, plus the Tier 1 budget, which would bring the budgets with the Tiers 1 and 2 to $58,003,923, which is a total increase of $3,684,097, or 6.78% overall. These are the positions in the Tier 2 highly critical area. As I said, the high school guidance counselor, middle school art, .2, the special ed director, director of fine arts, elementary music teacher, and then the 2 unified coaches for basketball and track, the $342,195. Move on to Tier 3, and this is my last tier that I'll tell you tonight. So our proposed budget with Tier 3 is a critical needs budget, and includes these supports and services, such as the addition of district and school level leadership and technology into the high school. These positions are critical because of the growing technology needs of the district, enrollment increase at the high school, and the demand on administration. Additional high school teachers in foreign languages, English, health, and science, and additional support personnel to address increased needs of students. Additional adjustment counselors at the elementary and middle school levels to address the continued increase of mental health needs of our students. Increased special education teachers and support staff at the elementary level to ensure equity and to adequately address the needs of our youngest students, and various coaching positions to support our athletic programs, and an additional maintenance employee to better address the operational mechanical needs of the district. So overall, the Tier 3, those needs there are over $1 million, $1,080,163 over the status quo. If you put all of those together with all tiers 1 through 3, the budget would come to $59,061,956, which is a $4,742,130 increase, or 8.73%. And in this one here, I just mentioned most of these as I went through the budget. But you can see the district technology, the adjustment counselors at the elementary, to be 4 of those, special education teachers, assistant principal at the high school, Chinese, English, health, paraeducators, science, Spanish at the high school. Middle school would be an additional adjustment counselor, secretary, and then special education teachers at PRS and South, paraeducators at South, and then various coaching positions. I will say, just so that people are clear on the athletic budget, there were no additional anywhere in tiers 1, 2 for athletics. So, and that's not included. There were no additions in our base budget either. It's just as it is. It's level funded, with exception to increases that are necessary. This is probably too small for everybody to read. I know that you have a copy of it in your budget, but it's the overall lines in the budget that create the 6.15, and so it's broken down. The blue section is all the regular ed budget, the green is special education, and the red is vocational technical school. These are just another slide for that just broken down a little bit better for you. You can see the regular ed budget overall is 5.5, I think it's 5.56% overall increase. Special education and vocational technical has an increase. The special ed is 8.21%. The technical is actually down by 8.17% because we have one less student right now that we have a plan to attend, but as I said, we have to watch that because we may have to increase it. And then overall, our overall budget, which we've already talked about, is 6.15% increase. I want to talk a little bit about our budget. Just by the makeup of the budget, over 83% of our budget is on personnel. So most of this is fixed cost. This is one of the things we talked about. It's fixed because we either we have to reduce that to have something else, or that's where most of the cost goes, is 83%. Our contracts take up 14%, that's transportation, that's electricity, those kind of things. And then we have 3%, which we have the other category that takes everything up from supplies and those kind of things that we have. So the majority of our budget, again, is 83% is simply on personnel. And then this is just another pie chart to show you how the budget breaks down. 59% of it goes to regular education, 25% goes to special education, vocational technical. Health and student activities takes 3%, facilities and operation 8%, regular transportation is 2%, and then school committee administration is 3%. This is our grants and revolving account offsets. I don't know, John, if you want to say anything about that right now. I think it's pretty self-explanatory of what we expect coming in. Do you want to add anything to that, John?
No, just the offsets add to the overall dollars that we
Yep.
spend.
Okay.
And they're taken out of that.
So we've included that in your packet for you as well. And I want to talk a little bit about, because one of my entry plans item was that I said we would talk about future-focused ideas. And so this is not an immediate that we have to take care of right now, but it is something I want to put on your radars. I think with our technology needs being placed in the capital budget, the district has historically been forced to often choose between the maintenance of our school buildings and then our technology needs of our students. While administrators, I think, have worked incredibly hard to find a fair balance between the two, it's clear that the district has not been able to keep up with the necessary maintenance of our schools. I would add that many of those phone calls that I get often would argue that we have not been able to keep up with the technology needs either. And so we're really struggling with that. Because of this, we believe that it would be important to consider moving the technology from the capital budget to the operating budget somewhere in the future. The impact would be, so we all know, it's right now there's $440,000 in our capital budget for technology, so it would obviously be a minimum increase to our budget of $440,000. And then I would say, finally, the Hingham Public Schools is one of just 37 remaining school districts in Massachusetts that do not provide a free full-day kindergarten to all children. Approximately 98% of Hingham families did register for kindergarten, participate in a full-day program, and they pay tuition to do so. With this, the district needs to consider offering at some point, and the legislature has been debating this already, of forcing school districts to offer free full-day kindergartens. We need to be thoughtful of that in the future. That is a big hit because that's $980,000 that we receive in tuition. So it's something we have to be mindful for, and we have to begin to think about and how we might get there. So overall, that's the budget. I tried to be quick. I don't know if it was quicker than the last one, I think ACES. So thank you, and we certainly will take questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Sorry, just going to do this really quickly. I think two things I think for folks to take away from this, and one is our students do perform really well, but it is, I think, our most vulnerable students that are at the biggest risk here, and that's where we're seeing the slip in performance, and we need to really be paying attention to that. And I also just wanted to point out that in the grant and revolving account offsets, that the school department does generate $1,734,554. That's just from parents. That's from parents paying for kindergarten and sports fees and middle school activity fees. So, I mean, that's a big dollar amount that the parents themselves are contributing to the education of their children in the town. And just to be clear, that's exclusive of what Hingham Education Foundation contributes, what Hingham Sports Partnership contributes. So I just thought that was worth highlighting, that, parents are putting some of this bill personally in addition to their property taxes that they're paying. So that's it. Thanks.
That was a terrific presentation. Thank you, Paul. Joe, do you have any questions at this point?
No, I think if If we could fund it all, that would be terrific.
Meeting adjourned.
All those in favor?
We'll take it.
The needs, particularly the fine arts director, is something that I would have a personal passion about, but I do recognize the constraints. One of the questions I had, with the various tiers, there were the dollar amounts that it would increase. Do you have the dollar amounts of the full impact on the budget? So, for example, health insurance and retirement obligations are not included in your budget, but it will impact the overall town budget. So do we have a dollar amount for the impact on the town's budget for going from Tier 1 to Tier 2 to Tier 3?
I don't know, John, I'll ask you, I don't think we have that, we haven't calculated that.
No, no, we don't. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of the Tier 3 one has to do with like one-time monies that wouldn't be people. But then to the extent that there's an increase in people, about 46% would take out insurance, or I think we're at 46 to 48%
Right.
the school employees taking insurance.
So the dollar impact on the town of going for these tiers is larger than what is being presented.
Probably, yes, that makes sense.
There's also Medicare tax as well, so there's some.
Yeah,
Some
it'd
additional,
be
yeah.
helpful, at least for me, to understand the full impact of going from one tier to the next.
Yep, okay.
But you've really, done, I think, a very compelling presentation.
Thank you.
And we intend to, at least we all, I think, intend to support the schools within the constraints that we have as fiduciaries of the town. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Mary, questions?
I just want to start by complimenting you on how much time you have invested into the community and being in the schools and being at school-related events. You know, I run into you at music programs, at sports fields, in schools, at community events, and I really just want you to know that we in the community value the investment of time that you're making, and it's also been delightful to get to know your wife.
Yeah.
And
Better half, that's true, actually.
It's I just want you to know that we notice that and we value it.
Thank you.
I had just a couple quick questions. Are there any retirements and leaves of absence in the past have been things that can sometimes create some room in the budget? What assumptions does this budget have with respect to leaves of absences or retirements?
Yeah, I believe we've included those as they are, but John, you want to answer? Yeah.
3 retirements that we know of, and as far as leaves of absence, we'll find out March 1st.
Yeah, we're still working on those.
There's not
Okay.
that many that are out there, but
Right,
there's a possibility of more in there.
okay. We'll certainly get that to you when I have that.
Sure. And this may be a difficult question, given that you've only been in the role for a short period of time, but as you've been working through the budget, you know, are there any programs that you look at to say, gee, I think we might be able to deliver these services in a different way? Or, you know, we've had this program, but, you know, it no longer needs to be in place because, you know, for whatever reasons. Are there any, you know, to what extent does this budget reflect any changes in service delivery or diversions of funds from existing programs?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, and most times when you've had time to be able to do that, that would be something I would do.
Understand.
There hasn't been much time to do that. I will say I've looked at class sizes, I've looked at number of courses that have less than
Sure.
10 children in it, so we begin that process, but we're not in a place where I can say, gee, I really want you to, you know, think about something different with that, maybe we need to eliminate this over here because we can make room for something else. That's a very fair question, and you
Sure.
can expect that from me in the future.
Absolutely.
This year has not been it.
No,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
totally understand. Just a couple comments. When I was on the ACES subcommittee, starting 10 years ago, the status quo budget in the schools was about 3.5%. And, you know, the fact that it's creeping up to 4.4%, I think, is a function of staff additions and contractual obligations. And, you know, I just observe, and you're experiencing it, that the higher those costs are, the more challenging it is to add positions.
Right.
It's that really tricky balance. I would ask, as you're looking at the budget, you know, just a couple of things to take a look at. John Ferris knows this one's coming, because every year I beat the drum on revolving funds. But I'd asked Sue to pull out some of the balances, and I just throw out a couple things for your consideration. Since 2010, the athletic revolving fund, the building fund, and the field revolving fund have grown by $750,000. And, I think you could make an argument in 2010 that those balances maybe weren't, they weren't providing sufficient flexibility, but I question whether we've overcorrected. And I would say that, just in personal experience, when I pay my son's athletic fee at the high school, if I look at sort of the turnover in that fund, I conclude that $325 sits in that account for 2 to 3 years before it's used. And meanwhile, you have lots of parents and booster groups that are running to raise money, fundraise, to subsidize things. We're spending a lot of time and effort, and I think for some of the parents, we kind of feel like we're paying for these things multiple times over. As I look at the athletic revolving fund, I would say, is there an opportunity to either apply more to the budget or perhaps expand some of the services in the athletic department where it's kind of a wash? I'm not suggesting that we put the balance down to zero, but it seems to me that we're at a place where it might be a good idea to say, how much should be in there? What's the floor and what's the ceiling? And I'd say similarly with the building revolving fund, because it's increased by about sixfold. And, I think in the last few years that there've been a number of custodians and things that the taxpayers have funded. And the rationale was that the buildings are being used after hours quite a bit, so that's fine. But again, I think if we just ought to look to see, are we putting those dollars back into the community quickly enough? The second thing on a related note, in kind of the time when, like the 2008-2009 period, there was discussion about whether, Kids in Action and the school lunch, and whether the insurance costs could be paid out of the revolving fund. At the time, the decision was made to do that with Kids in Action, but the food service program was not in a place where it could do that. And I think, in great credit to Kim Smythe and to her team, I think your lunch revolving fund has about $800,000 in it. I know that capital outlay has funded some necessary upgrades to the kitchen equipment. So, I might ask that you and Tom, as a follow-up, look to see, would it be appropriate to fund those benefits similar to the way we do for KIA, which takes them out of the operating budget, which creates a little more room for everybody. I guess the last thing I would just say is, as we're moving down to this piece, and I say this to the school committee as well, it is super duper hard to take things off the table. We get it, we live it. I think in the last couple of years, if we look at the town's status quo budget and the incremental stuff we've gotten, usually if there's incremental money on the municipal side, it's for like snow removal or legal fees, so you don't even get new stuff out of it. I would ask us all to be, as we move towards finalizing our budget and making recommendations to the advisory committee, we've got a $1.7 million deficit. I don't think that's going to evaporate on its own. I think we're going to have to work towards it. And I would just say to our school committee colleagues that when everybody takes things off the table, hard as it is, it really does go a long way. And I know it's hard, but I would just ask us all, as we're in that home stretch, to look at the revenue that's available and use that as a basis for the final votes for the advisory committee. This board always feels pretty strongly that when we vote all the budgets, we want to vote a balanced budget. And so that means that I think last year we funded 10% of the additional requests from the town administrator, and it wasn't easy. I think there's a lot to be said that, we all kind of rise and fall together. I just think it goes a long way. So I don't quite know what your budget timing and process is, But I would ask you to consider that as you're closing out the budget.
Thanks, Mary. Paul, members of the school committee, really compelling budget, and, you know, as Joe said, you know, if I could write a check, I would write the check, because I think you make very clear cases for really each of the tiers that you've presented. You know, I do think the challenge, at least for this year for me, is to try to get to a balanced budget. And so, you know, in that regard, a couple questions I had. One was, you know, ed reform at the state level, changes in the foundation budget, like how does that, is that just reflected in our state aid number, or how is that reflected in your budget?
Right now, I think you included it, in the state aid budget.
line item?
I will say some of that actually, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what number that is, but it should be in the number of 360. On top, what you have of that $8 million that comes from state aid, that was intended as part of the Student Opportunity Act, which is intended to be used to increase services to students. So that's one of the challenges. It's in the budget, but it's already accounted for in the governor's budget and proposed in state aid.
Yep. And then the other question I had, and I realize this is a tiny line item, but one of the things I look at when I look at budgets besides revolving funds is, are there town-school synergies that we might kind of tackle things in common? And so, and maybe this ship has just sailed and I missed this boat among many others, but the HR director position, I just, I know you have an HR director position budgeted, like, I guess, again, maybe the ship has sailed, but I understand there would be particular expertise that might be needed for school side personnel issues, but I'm also sort of wondering whether that could be accomplished with a common HR program.
I think, and Tom, I know you and I have talked about it briefly, and I think we've just recognized the level of need we have, and that would be an undoable position. We're not adverse. I can see that for myself, and Tom and I work really well together to try to find those areas of common ground, which I think is great. I think we came to a conclusion. We just had needs on both sides that just aren't going to be met. And this is an area that, and I was talking, and I don't like to compare my previous district to this. It was a very poor area, but I had a full-time HR person that just did HR and benefits. And ours is, we don't have an HR person now, we hopefully will soon, and that's important, but the benefits is taken care of by someone who's also writing payroll. And so mistakes get made because there's just simply not enough people. So we are really hurting in that area. In fact, one person is going to be tough. It'll be a tough job. And it makes up an incredible amount of my time in human resource. And I know in all the rest of them, whether it's Suzanne Vinnis or Jamie or John, that are dealing with those things at the same time. So if there was a way to do that I thought we could get away with at halftime, I would absolutely go with that direction. But I think we both came to that conclusion that just wasn't going to work because of the level of work that has to be done.
Okay, I guess I don't fully, good.
So I can speak to that a little bit. So the question that you're asking, you're posing, Karen, is about HR in particular.
Yeah.
And what Paul is posing as an answer is that the HR needs of the department over there are larger than anticipated. What the proposal was last year was for the benefits, to share a benefits coordinator. And I think, Paul, you and I could probably still noodle on that a little bit, because I think that there's an opportunity there. We have a part-time benefits coordinator here. I think making that position a full-time might be able to provide the benefit support for both sides from a benefit standpoint. I understand your HR needs might be different, but from a benefit standpoint, we might be able to work that out.
Okay.
I agree.
Thank you, Tom.
I mean, it's just one of the things that jumped out at me. I don't know, you have kind of the supply slice of the pie, like are there, common purchasing we should be doing? Like, is there another way to look at, I guess, maybe the non-student facing aspects of the budget and try to figure out whether, again, there are some synergies on the town side that we haven't yet explored? that, you know, may create some financial efficiency in the budget, I don't know.
I think that's an excellent point, and one of the things is I've continued to learn, and I've learned about the town side of the budget as well as mine and get a handle on that. I see that those talks continue well into the future, and it's a great relationship that we have right now. I'm really pleased with that, and I think that those opportunities will continue to rise moving forward to find efficiencies.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the advisory committee?
Anyone advisory, questions, comments? I guess not.
Okay. Any comments from the school committee before we open it up to questions from the audience? No? Okay. Questions from the public with respect to the school budget presentation? Yes, ma'am. Hi. Name and address, if you would.
Jay McGrath, 28 Towerbrook Road. Just one question. On the buildings that are unusable for Tracy's, you mentioned, has any thought been given to using the old light company building or the DPW building? And maybe this has already come up.
No, great question. Yeah. Nope, good question.
That was it.
Good question. You okay with me answering? I know, I'm just making sure.
I'll take it.
Oh, you take it, then, that's fine.
Yeah, please.
So, thank you for the question. I think that this is an important need. It doesn't, the building where they were right now just doesn't work, and it won't work in the near future. So I did meet with the superintendent this past week. We walked through the light plant building, the 308 Cushing property, I believe is what you're referring to. We walked through it. We identified that there are likely some opportunities there. I need to flesh those out a little bit. We're having a builder walk through the property tomorrow to give us a sense of what that space might look like and what it would cost to get there. This would require a new article this year. So I'm hoping that if this works out, and it looks like it might preliminarily, I would like to
keep it on the down low.
It's preliminary at this stage, but I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to present to the Board of Selectmen a new article for that purpose in the next couple of weeks.
I appreciate you asking the question. I think it's the robotics program and the Traces program are two incredibly important programs to the students of the district, and it's important that we find a home for them here in town. And I think that you can see that the superintendent and the town administrator are both committed to trying to make that happen, you know, in a cooperative fashion.
I would also point out, Karen, if you don't mind, the day that the facility was closed for safety purposes, legitimate safety reasons, Paul reached out to me. I spoke with John. John was in our building department. We were actively working on that from the afternoon that it was closed through this effort, this most recent effort. Cooperation between Paul's department and my office has been outstanding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for asking the question. Mr. McElhaney.
Andy McElhaney, 26 Myers Farm Road. And I had two questions. One is, on the slide that presents the budgets for each school year, 2016 to 2015, 2016, and then up to the current budget, how much work would it be to intersperse columns of amounts actually expended?
I think that could be, yeah. Right. We can, if you'd like to have that, I mean, we do that within, I think John was saying, as we publish the budget, we certainly provide those numbers, and we could provide those numbers to you.
Okay, and the second question I have, are there any statistics, when looking at the 20 cities and towns, are there any statistics that indicate how much money, such as revolving fund, athletic fund types things, or any kind of fundraising, other towns are able to supply to the school committee, to the school departments?
I have not done
Sort
that.
of off-the-books type stuff. Do you have it?
I've seen in some of the per pupil that grants and revolving funds are lumped together. So I don't know how easy it would be to pull those. I don't think you could pull those things apart to be able to answer your specific question. And I have a feeling that grants are probably larger than revolving funds. So it would be, not sure that we could get it. You could get at that.
Are there any school departments that have large fundraising efforts similar to private schools?
I'm sure that there are. I haven't done a study on that. What I have looked at is our athletic fees, and how we compare with our benchmarks. And I mean, we're higher than some and lower than others. It depends on the area, but we seem to be fairly in line with that off the top of my head tonight. But I haven't done any extensive study on the areas you talked about.
Thank you. Further questions on the school budget presentation this evening? Mr. Ross.
Joshua Ross, 125 Wampatuck Road. I'll also add that, the PTOs raise $250,000 a year. You talk a lot about the scores and how well the students are doing. One of the numbers that's not shown is how much parents pay for tutors in this town, and the PTOs pay for tutors at the high school. They pay for ACT and SAT tutors to come in with the kids. So there's a unwritten number of expenditures that happens that's not reported anywhere that sort of only happens in Hingham. So I'll just say that off the bat.
No, I think that's a good point.
Second, and I've been asking this question for years, so hopefully this can get answered at some point. The number that stands out to me is that we spend last year $3.5 million to send kids out of district for special education. Has there ever been an analysis on how much we need to spend here to keep these kids here and how much we would save every year? It seems to me for 44 kids to spend $3.5 million, there should be some sort of analysis on what do we need to spend to keep them here. So that would be my question.
Michelle, would you like to respond, or Dr. Austin?
I'll take the first shot at that, Mr. Ross. I think one is that's something that Suzanne Venice is looking at constantly. How do we provide programs and services here that would bring, and we do bring students back. We have students that move in that have different needs. And so will there ever be a time that we reduce that to a substantial, I can't answer that overall. I think there's some challenges in the fact of with creating programs, space is an absolute problem for us. Being able to house that. When you look at programs from other districts, they're using buildings that are either older school buildings that are no longer used for that purpose, et cetera. We really have a space problem. So I mentioned that a little bit here, that so we could create programs, and we could. The issue is where do they go? And then, so that is something that I would absolutely say that I'm sure that Dr. Venice looks at constantly, of how she can provide supports and services that will bring students home to the least restrictive environment that we have here in Hingham, and that's always our goal.
Right, and so one of the things in this budget, it goes up $1 million for this year, and you said, is there projecting more students having to go out of district this upcoming year?
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think that you're absolutely right. There's a large increase in that out-of-district placement. The reason for that, we actually have fewer this year that are out of district. We have 3 fewer than we did last year. The problem is at the end of last year, we had students after the budget was built that moved in that created that shortfall, and now creates to a part of, in order to fund that the way we're supposed to now, that's where that increase is. It's not because we expect more students. It's just that things changed from the time that the budget was adopted in April of last year, of 19. So it did change. The other thing that happens is that we have no control over the tuition that these places charge. We can get big increases, and we did, in certain areas. So that's exactly why that part of the budget is up.
Right. I would just like, we as a town love to analyze everything up and down with feasibility studies and everything. It seems that in the school budget, this big chunk of money has a prime opportunity to be analyzed about how we could keep the kids here, and potentially, even if we spend $2 million here, we could save $500,000 by not, the transportation costs, and not to mention just having to send your kid, God knows where, out of state sometimes, North Shore. I don't want to say anything bad about the North Shore, but it's far. It seems to me that this sort of analysis should have been done, because we spend millions of dollars a year, and it's a potential for a lot of savings. And so I hope that this is done going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Peter Howell, 26 Del Pret Drive. So first of all, thank you all for all you do. I was here earlier when you renewed your salaries, and you are truly volunteers. I know it's a very, very difficult job that you're doing, and it's some very tough decisions that we have to make. To follow up on a point Josh made, a lot of the parents that have kids in the schools at Foster, or in any of the Hingham schools, they are paying a lot to get extra help for their kids, especially the parents that have kids with special needs or extra needs. We have a second grader at Foster who needs help with speech. He has speech impediment, which has slowed him down with reading. So last year in first grade, he was behind. We worked with the school, and the school's been great. I mean, we have no complaints about the teachers, the administrators. But the most we could get, the most we've been able to get in terms of help, is 15 minutes every 6 days for help with speech, individualized help. And that's an hour a month. It's really nothing. So we have to get a speech tutor. We paid to send him to Linda Mood Bell over the summer. That's tons of money. We would gladly pay more in taxes to get those services in the school. We would pay less if we could pay a little bit more in taxes, if we all paid a little bit more to get those types of services in the schools. It seems to me that there is a hesitancy to want to have an override to increase taxes. But I think from speaking with other families in Hingham, I don't get the sense that people are opposed to that. I think people will pay more to see all of the critical needs addressed. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Further questions with respect to the school budget presentation? Ray?
Good evening, Madam Chairman. Ray Estes, 92 Fort Hill Street. Not a question, but just a comment. I served on the school committee for 6 years. I started paying very close attention to this budget and the municipal budget probably 11 years ago or so. And certainly being on the school committee, I got very intimate with both budgets, particularly the school budget. One of the things I wanted to say is a lot of the needs that were presented tonight are not new needs. Many of them, I'm sure you've heard before. Certainly the math positions in particular, I know that I heard when I was on the school committee a number of years. And I think the approach over the years in the past was to kind of triage the budget before it got to a certain point with a conservative bent, kind of understanding a lot of the town position that you've presented tonight, and we certainly understand and appreciate, rather than throwing it all out there and saying, we need all of this. Certainly, the increases that are being suggested tonight are significant and go far beyond any increases that have been suggested in the past 20 plus years, at least in my understanding of it. One of the things that I started hearing probably 11 years ago or so was the word unsustainable. Heard that from advisory members of Selectmen and other folks in town. And I truly understood what that meant, is when you can only increase property taxes year over year a certain amount and budgets go up more than that, it creates a structural deficit and it's unsustainable. I get that from a math point of view. But the fact of the matter is we have been able to sustain our budgets over the past decade, at least that I've been paying close attention, and we've done that in a number of creative ways, many of which you've been involved in on advisory and as members of the board, and we certainly appreciate that. I think there's an opportunity now, certainly with a new superintendent who's taking a fresh look at the budget and has perhaps been given instructions, and I don't know the answer to this, but perhaps been given instructions to not hold back and to tell you what we really need. And there was a time a number of years ago when I was on the committee where we did try to approach the school budget as a needs-based budget more than just level services, you know, and then what we could get beyond that. So I certainly, you know, respect and applaud Dr. Austin for taking this opportunity to kind of explain what the school department really needs. Many of the needs have been around for quite a long time, have been in budget asks before, and have not been funded as important needs. Just one last thing that I would point out: the Fine and Performing Arts Director that is in Tier 2 in this presentation, I think is a really important position. Many folks are here tonight with that same frame of mind. I have the pleasure to serve on the high school council. Mr. Swanson is in the room, I know. And one of the things that we've been talking about is graduation requirements. And many of you may not know, but credits are required of every student in order to graduate in fine or performing arts. So if we think it's, or the state rather, thinks it's important enough to require it for graduation, then certainly it should be as important as math or social studies or world language math, where we have department-wide directors. And certainly we distinguish ourselves from many other communities in the Commonwealth as approaching our curriculum from a K-12 position. I think that would be particularly helpful with respect to fine and performing arts, because there is a lack of consistency when you look at the different levels, elementary to middle school to high school, in particularly performing arts. So I would support adding that position, if not this year, perhaps next year, but I think it's a very important position, particularly since the Commonwealth feels it is as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Further questions on the school budget presentation this evening? Yes.
Hi, I'm Monica Tessler. I live at 246 Central Street. And I would just like to share some personal experience in favor of having the fine arts director and the additional special education director. My son Nathan is in 9th grade at Hingham High School. He's been in special education here in Hingham since he was 3 years old. He's also been very active in music, both inside and outside of school. If you went to a Hingham band concert, he's the first chair clarinet, he tunes up the band, so you'd see him there. You would imagine our dismay last year in 8th grade when we discovered that if he were to continue on in special education in 9th grade, he would not be able to be a full participant in the Hingham High School band. That's because he's on an IEP, and students that are on an IEP, especially one of the base accommodations is to be placed into a Strategies for Learning study hall. It's a directed study hall. And if you are placed in that class in 9th grade, you cannot fully participate in band, chorus, or orchestra because it conflicts with the gym requirement. And in 10th grade, it conflicts with both the gym and health requirement. So Nathan and I both immediately went to try and address this for him. And I have to say, to the credit of our educators and our special education staff, many people tried to help us, including counselors, special education teachers, and of course our music teachers. But there really was no solution to this issue of the scheduling. And it put our family in a very difficult position. And I might say that music, it's so unfortunate that students that are in the special education population are not able to fully access the music programs at Hingham High School. Music has been well documented in research to help students attend during the school day. It's been shown that students that have sensory processing issues can get the sensory input they need through attending music class. It's a huge benefit to mental health, which our special education population is disparately affected by. Also, there are many special education students who excel at music where they may not excel in traditional academic classes. By not allowing them full access to the music program, you're taking away a boost to self-esteem, and you're also taking away perhaps future learning and perhaps even professional opportunities down the road. That wasn't something our family wanted to have. So we ended up making a difficult decision to have Nathan move from an IEP to a 504 plan after having been on an IEP here for 12 years. So after his first semester of freshman year of high school, he stopped the strategies class so he could fully participate year-round in band. I just want to note that this is a special circumstance for our family alone, given Nathan's profile and my family's ability to pay for an outside tutor that allowed us to make this choice. But what stood out to me was that there was no one charged with the leadership of how the scheduling issue could be addressed. There simply was no solution to the situation. And this is just one instance in where someone in a leadership role in fine arts and also having our special education appropriately staffed at the leadership level could really help these students and make our fine arts available and accessible to all students, especially those in our vulnerable special education population. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Mary.
I want to just thank some of the personal stories, and there are a lot of music people in the room, and my children, one was in the music program until he graduated, and I've had one who's been in after-school strings and is currently an 11th grader. Not to the degree of the previous speaker, but one of my children has had to make difficult trade-offs that were very frustrating for our family. So I understand that happens on different levels. I would also just say that with respect to the Board of Selectmen, and some of you have written, and we've tried to respond to as many of you as we can, on the municipal budgets, we actually have to do line item budgets. So we budget for a police officer, we budget, and during the year, we can't move things around. Massachusetts law actually gives school committees and school administration the ability to spend dollars as they see fit, because the budget is very fluid, the activity is fluid. So as this board is making a decision, and I hope you heard this from all of us, our goal is to maximize the amount of budget that the school department budget gets. I think you've heard from all three of us, we'd love to fund everything that we could, because everything is worthy. Similarly to the budget Mr. Mayo presented. How those dollars are spent is really up to the decisions of the school committee and the school administration. So as we're looking at it, we're looking to maximize the dollars, how they're spent, and sometimes I think those decisions are even made after town meeting because things continue to remain fluid.
Yeah, I would agree.
Thanks for that clarification. Any further questions on the school budget presentation this evening? Libby.
Libby Lewicki, 370 Gardner Street, and again, I'm speaking with my community member hat on. What I'm hearing when you ask the schools to pull out their sharp pencils and start cutting from the budget is taking away from the needs of one child and putting them towards another. And as you have respectfully asked us to do that, I'm respectfully asking you to find more revenue. And with discussions that I've had with people in town is that there may be less resistance to raising taxes in one way or another in order to meet the needs of all of the people in this community. And I'm not just talking about students, but seniors and the police department and the fire department, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, I guess I'd just say, and I know we're here to talk about the school budget, but as Mary said, I think that the exercise that we've undertaken on the town side is more reminiscent of what Mr. Estes shared probably with respect to prior school committee budgets, and that is there's a lot of erasing that goes on before those budgets get in front of us, because the message is sort of clear on our end. And so, I think that at some point it would be interesting and worthwhile to conduct the same kind of needs analysis on the town side as the school side. And to me, if we are going to begin conversations about changes in our tax base, we need to have that fulsome conversation about broader community needs, as you're suggesting, Libby. And I think the other thing I'm not a math person, so I don't have my arms around is, so if we grow the base and we pick some number that we grow the base by, right, to Ray's earlier point, we've got to be able to then sustain that base. Fully loaded, we've got to be able to sustain the base. Because it strikes me that if we ask the community to do this, I think we've got to be certain about what that ask should be, and certain that we can maintain that going forward. And I think that, again, in the very short term, there will be significant asks for capital improvements that need to happen. And then, again, I appreciate there's frustration on the timing, but to me, that's a point in time where I think we do need to have this broader conversation. And frankly, again, I'm sure it's frustrating, but I think that's a conversation that has to start really in September, because to me, we all have to have this same needs analysis done. And then we've got to, again, we've got to look out and be forward thinking about what that load's going to look like to carry into the future. Because you've heard us talk about the fact that personnel costs are recurring, right? Once we build that personnel base, those are our people. That's what it takes to run our shop. And those costs grow automatically. And they carry with it, Medicare taxes and retirement benefits and other stuff that's not necessarily reflected in the line item of the particular budget that's presented to us. So I don't disagree. We are hearing you. I guess where I'm at, and again, I understand that it's frustrating, I feel like I'm looking already at significant tax increases that I think are going to be difficult for people to swallow. Number one. And number two, I think that if we're going to undertake this, we need to undertake it in a comprehensive way, and we need to involve all aspects of our town operation in that conversation.
And if I could just add, I think that there is genuine community understanding that we need to do something at Foster School. We haven't gone through the MSBA process, but I'm thinking there's going to be a new school there. As someone who led the outreach and the advocacy effort to build East School and then open it with an override, I will tell you that there's a difference between asking somebody if they would like a new school and asking them if it's okay to raise their taxes to pay for it. I think that while there is genuine understanding of the need at Foster School, I think whatever number comes out, there's going to be sticker shock, and we are all going to need to work together to get that school built. As I'm looking at the priorities for the school department, to me, Foster School is a big one. I've heard Dr. Austin talking about space issues. Foster will give us some more space. Maybe there's some creative things that we can do outside of the MSBA to add some space that would be more cost effective, that would, give us some flexibility. I don't want to jeopardize getting Foster School, and I think it's going to be a heavier lift than we may think it is, because every time we've built a school in the last 12 years, it's been a pretty heavy lift. So, keeping my eye on that one.
Just the one eye, though, right?
Just the one eye.
I mean, you put it out. You put it out there. By the way,
time to adjourn.
You've been a tremendous sport to be here tonight, and I do appreciate it. I'm sorry I took that shot at you.
That's pretty good.
So, and I guess I would just say it's a priority for the schools, but it is a priority for the town, and it is something that we need to work together on. And when we looked down the road at what's the capital project that comes next, I mean, frankly, on my list was Foster School, regardless, right? So I think we're in a very fortunate circumstance, and we're in a fortunate circumstance, I think, because of the hard work of the school committee and the hard work of the staff and the hard work of the leadership at Foster School. We were in attendance at various meetings, and the ability of the principal and the staff at the school that manages the physical plan at the school to be able to translate for the MSBA folks the programmatic concerns that the facility presented to, essentially the functioning of the school, I think put it over the line. And we are competing competing may be the wrong word, but we're in a pool of very needy communities with very significant capital, school capital issues. And so, you know, to be awarded this opportunity is significant. And one of the things that the MSBA assesses is, does the community support this? So that's why it's important that somebody from the Board of Selectmen show up and stand with the elected school committee to say, yes, we are going to advocate together with you for this school. And without that support, and without the indication of support that town meeting gave a year or so ago in approving feasibility funds ahead of schedule, without those, you know, indications of support, they've got too many other projects on their list. So they're not going to waste their time with a town that's not going to be supportive of the project. So again, I get that this is frustrating and it's expensive, and the needs are immediate. And I get you're only in second grade once. I really do. And I will say I am trying my best to make it through this budget cycle and to provide for the needs, you know, the best way I can. So I thank you for your attendance. I thank you for your collegiality. I thank you for sharing your stories. I thank you for your emails. They really do help inform us about the very significant needs of this particular community. And, you know, we get them across the board. You know, so we're seeing needs across the town, which, to your point, Libby, you know, points to a broader conversation around being able to, I think, afford town services at the level that we'd like to afford them. So I think we'll move on to the next.
Before we move on, I know people are here for the school budget presentation, but don't leave, because the school budget items that are not in the school budget, we're about to take up.
Yep.
So there's more to what this board is doing to support the schools than what you've just heard. So please stay.
So with that, I'd like to.
Karen,
Oh, sorry, Victor, sure.
May I recess, or is it not?
No, sure.
Okay, so advisory, we're going to take a short recess and reconvene directly back upstairs in another room to continue with our agenda.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yes.
Public leaving anyway.
That was a good point.
We're not doing that tonight.
You can sit wherever you want to.
Just gavel and continue?
I'm going to give people a minute. We can't take that.
Yeah, that's what I said. I have a lot of influence.
Hey, is who was sitting there?
It was on the bench.
Okay. I think this.
I'll announce it upstairs.
Oh, good.
Okay. It might be Dave sitting there. Okay. Do you want to take it upstairs and bring it?
It's probably an ad conference. If not, just give it to me when I see it.
Primaries. Is John going to come up and present this?
Been texting him, he said he was here.
Is in? John Ferris? 76.
Oh.
Wow. Oh, okay.
Look at Klobuchar.
Sorry, we got a long night ahead of us, so I'd really like to continue with our agenda. Thanks to those of you who can stay, I appreciate it. I know it's a long night. I'd like to move to item 7 on our agenda, which is a statement of interest for the MSBA Plymouth River Elementary School. We've got a vote on this statement of interest. I'm wondering, Paul or John Ferris, is someone here to present on behalf of the schools? So maybe you could just take a minute and explain the project and the process here for the public.
Right. And so quickly, and John has more detail than I have, and I'm hoping he comes back at some point so we can make sure that you everything we need. But in a nutshell, in 2017, obviously the town meeting approved $750,000 for feasibility. When we were accepted into the MSBA program, we began to look at we got actual numbers.
So Paul, we're actually on the Plymouth River School?
On the what?
Plymouth River School.
I apologize for that. John is a better one for that one.
All right, let's go to S then. let's go to Foster feasibility.
Thank you.
Sure.
So the Foster one with the feasibility, and my apologies for that. So as I said, in 2017, the town meeting approved $750,000 for the use of feasibility. When we were accepted into the MSBA program, we got new numbers and as far as what feasibility of current projects are, and what we realized is that we were, even on the current ones done now, right at the threshold of and above where they would be going. So we were mindful of that we would probably have to think about if the $750,000 was a doable number that would help us through that project. Now, the reality is that by the time we get to feasibility, we're still quite a ways out. We're another year out from feasibility even, because we have until December to finish the eligibility projects, and then we would go to feasibility after that. So we're actually going to be in feasibility probably in 21. So being mindful of that, our recommendation was to increase that just a bit to ensure that we have enough money to do the things that we want. I would also say that if you don't use it, that's great. It's not a matter of we're going to use it. That's all there is to it. Whatever we don't use will bump into the project itself and just cover the cost as we go down the road. So either way, even if you didn't do anything and left it at 750, we would still have to take away from, at some point we'd have to pay for that. So we thought incrementally, that's why that increase is there.
Yep, okay. Makes sense to me. I mean, you know, the increase in vertical construction and the increase, I think, in the analysis and feasibility of the building, I think it makes perfect sense. And again, it's another indication by the town that they're supportive of this project. So I support moving forward with this. Questions from my colleagues?
I'd just say that, that $750,000 was done 3 years ago, and these buildings and the associated feasibility studies, those costs have escalated.
Right.
We don't want to run out of money.
Right.
Right. And that's exactly why we thought to bump that up, so we don't do that.
Yeah, good thinking.
Joe?
No, we've discussed this, and I think we need to move forward with it.
Questions from the public with respect to an increase of the Foster feasibility money, funding it with an additional $350,000? Any other comments from the school committee on this? If not, I'd accept the motion on Article S.
I move to recommend favorable action of Article S.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So we've got Plymouth River, and we've got a couple of insurance items. I don't know whether, John, you want to address
would you help
these,
me
or?
with that? Just want to talk about Plymouth River first, if you want to come up and give a little background.
So, John, it would just help for the public to hear a little bit about the background for this project, which has been hanging around for several years. It would also be helpful to understand the difference between this repair and renovation bucket that the MSBA supports and the construction bucket. So a little bit about the process, background of the project, and a little bit about the process would be helpful. Thanks.
So with the Plymouth River SOI for a window project, for many years, the windows from PRS have really been in need of repair. Actually, if you trace it back even to the 2006 master plan, the references in that manual actually indicate that the steel frame windows, they're rusting. Some of them are blocked up. There's screens that are not functional, or some of them are missing screens. When we did an upgrade to that building in the 2007-2008 timeframe of the $3.5 million to give the building an update after many, many years. The building was actually built in 1968, 1969. It's 60,000 square feet. It's a beautiful little building. When we did that upgrade, what happened at that time, from what I understand, because I wasn't here at that point, was that the amount of the upgrade actually triggered the ADA requirements.
Right.
So as a result, we had to spend more money on ADA requirements, and therefore it got fewer windows done.
Right.
Now, to approach the school from the front, and you're going right into the front, those are the windows that you're seeing that look really nice, because that's what we did get to replace, right? A small fraction of what we did replace. There's some 11,000 square feet, or almost 11.8 thousand square feet of glass there. And when we took a look at what we thought got done compared to what still needs to be done, there's still about 10,000 square feet of glass, because there's a lot of glass in the back and the front and the windows, and there's actually glass up on the roof as well. So all of that glass has to be addressed. They're single pane windows. They don't provide any good thermal performance. Since I've been here, I mean, I've seen my electric costs escalate, even though our kilowatt rate hasn't increased significantly. I mean, it went down a little bit, then it came up, but it's almost about the same as where it was when I entered. It's somewhere around 15 to 16 cents a kilowatt to operate Plymouth River with sort of the new rate structure. But my costs have increased almost $50,000. So when I first came in here, I was spending about $100,000 between electric and heat for that building, because it's an all-electric building. Now on an annual basis, I'm spending about $150,000. But not only that, the building is in great shape. I think that it's a good little structure. That building can be around serving Hingham for another 20 years or even more, as long as we take care of it. If you walk around the back, and we've had a number of tours there over the years, so that, many members of the Community Advisory, Capital Outlay, Selectmen have been invited. Of course, they've been open meetings, so the public could have attended as well, to walk them around the building so they see the beautiful grounds. So they see those windows in the back that some are boarded up, so they're not letting in that real good light for student learning. Not to mention the fact that they can't, some can't be open, so you can't get some fresh air, say, in the springtime either. And the thing, we've been trying to get this project sort of underway, but we knew we had, when I first got here, East School was sort of in process. Plymouth River was actually overcrowded at that time, with some 664 kids in Plymouth River, and therefore we did build East. After East happened, we started actively working on the middle school. That one I was here for, because we had a snow load and we had a breach of a roof, and we had to go on a fast track there. And understanding that history, I think the school committees we were working with at the time, we understood the public. We understood, hey, we don't want to keep on going back to the well to get these projects. Let's slow this down, or let's give this a little break. Past several years, I've been even more and more active of saying we need to get this project done, because I've been here 9 years now. These windows haven't gotten any better. They weren't good in 2002, when we actually got a Gale report that fed into the 2006 master plan report. They were about of the same state, and they're just getting worse as we go along. So with last year, we did tour Plymouth River. When I say last year, I'm talking about 2018, when we had our capital outlay walk around. And, they said, hey, well, what do you think? Are we going to, are you going to do it? And I was very optimistic that we were going to get accepted into Foster back at that time. And I said, well, if we get accepted in Foster, I'd like to go forward and do this. But if we don't, we should probably hold off. This year, we did get into Foster. And, with that, I think that, it's time sort of to move this project forward, to get it sort of in a pipeline, either within the MSBA, but if we don't get into the MSBA, do we do this on our own? With this project, I'm estimating, when I looked at the MSBA comps, I hate to say a number, but it could be between 2.6 million, could be 3.2 million. I sent comps over to the board, and I think that it's going to be at the higher end, because I see so much glass, and I try to compare it to the square footage of the glass that I see in the comps. Also knowing that with the, it's not the Alliance, but the
Broadstone Bear
Cove project, I know that there was a mitigation fund or some mitigation monies that will be received completely by the town on behalf of by the town from that project of $1 million, which could essentially subsidize perhaps a third there. An MSBA project, if we were to get accepted, could perhaps subsidize another third of that project. And And then, of course, there would then be the taxpayer or a fund balance. It's a very good capital item. It's or a capital or a single use of funds. And, as the town's fund balance increases, I think that we should look at these types of projects that are shovel-ready, that people are ready to do, that we can actually get done and get accomplished, and perhaps get in and out of there very quickly, and sort of get those done so it doesn't build up and they don't all come together, especially with the timeline that we have for Foster.
What is the timeline you're anticipating
For
this one?
Well,
So you'd submit the statement of interest?
The statement of interest has to be in by Friday.
Yep.
When do we find out?
We'd probably find out around June, but.
And we have 18 months to finish it.
Yeah, then we'd have to, then we get the money, so and then, so as far as the money, so if we got accepted in June, I think that because this mitigation fund doesn't really need a vote to get the money out of, I think the MSBA would work with us so that we could say, hey, we have some money for the design and the engineering work, and we could go forward and try to get that designed, and then I think next April, we could actually get the funding to get the job done in the summer, if that timeline were to work. I don't, I had to step out, but, and I'm not sure if Paul told you, but when we did attend the MSBA meeting on the 11th, they told us on that December 11th that they did not accept any accelerated repair projects this year for windows, for windows. So I don't know whether we'd be in or whether we'd be out. If we got in, then, I would hope that we'd go forward. If we don't go, if we weren't to go get in, then I think we could just have more discussions and say, hey, do we start using the mitigation money to get the design work done and get a bid and see where we're at, and, expend fund balance or whatever resources we might have on a single-use basis to sort of get this building in shape. Because I think if we did, we'd be in really good shape. If we got accepted into this building, I think will last for a long time. It's a simple, single-story structure. It had those eave windows up at the top there, which have sort of been sealed up with the exception of maybe a couple of rooms, especially the art room. And many people would go into that art room and say, wow, this is really bright. If we did something, we should redo this with all the rooms. That could be a discussion that we have as a community. Do we want to sort of open up and revitalize this building and make it the way it used to be? But more importantly, I think this would be a step in the right direction to make sure that we pay attention to this building and to get it done sooner rather than later.
Okay.
If we were to be accepted in the MSBA, the minimum contribution would be 31.5%.
Okay, thank you. So the vote before us tonight is, and this is part of what we talked about before, you need to show community support for the application to the MSBA. So this is a vote of the board to endorse your statement of interest to put this project before the MSBA.
Yes.
Questions, Mary?
So, John, and thank you for providing all the information. So, based on what we kind of know right now, we think this is a $3 million project in total.
It may be 3.2, Mary.
Okay, so, again,
it's in that range.
Somewhere in that range.
I really can't say.
Of course. And then, so the MSBA reimbursement could be potentially like a third of it. The Broadstone Bear Cove money, so it would basically, if we're looking at it, it would be sort of, if we're accepted, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million that the town would need to find.
That's what my head's saying.
And my understanding from reading the materials is that by submitting this application, we are authorizing that we are prepared to complete the project within 18 months of the acceptance. I think that's an important difference that I don't have an issue with, but I just want to make sure we all know that we're kind of signing up for that.
Yes.
Yeah,
if we were accepted,
yeah.
They say don't do it if you don't have the funding to do it.
So if we are
correct.
accepted, we would need to initiate conversations with the advisory committee. As you've pointed out, there are different sources of funding. I sat on the board when we did the development agreement with Broadstone Bear Cove. We had given $1 million to the town for the new Quint. It seemed fair that if the town was the beneficiary of a second $1 million, that the education department should submit it. We talked to Dr. Gallo at the time and said, what would be a good project? that made sense as well, because any students in that building would be students at PRS, so there was a little bit of a relationship. So I think the board has supported this concept. I appreciate that you waited until Foster School. I know that in some ways they say the two were unrelated, but if we were going to this year's town meeting asking to go it alone on Foster and we had gotten $1 million from the windows, it would have made our job tougher. So I know sometimes it's hard to wait, but I appreciate your waiting on this one.
Joe, any questions?
Yeah, so these windows have been there over 50 years.
Yeah.
What's the useful life expectancy? And
I think, I'm not sure, and the MSBA, I'm not sure if they go into 30 years now, but, they were windows with 20 years, but I thought I heard them say at that meeting that now their standard for windows is got to be 30 years.
Yeah, so we're well over.
We're well over, yeah. And if we were to get benefited by a site visit because they're looking at our
They
school.
tell their own, those windows tell their own story.
Yeah, they do tell a story. So, I mean, we could potentially get this one, which would really set this building would be great for, 20 years.
John, they've just recorded that, I want you to know.
Yes, recorded, absolutely.
Questions from the public with respect to the submission of a statement of interest for windows at Plymouth River School? Seeing none, I would accept a motion.
I move the following resolution: having convened in an open meeting on February 11th, 2020, prior to the statement of interest submission closing date, the Hingham Board of Selectmen of Hingham, Mass. 02043, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority the statement of interest form dated February 14, 2020, for the Plymouth River Elementary School located at 200 High Street, Hingham, Mass., Assessors Map 124-032, which describes and explains the following deficiencies and the priority categories for which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future for an accelerated repair project for the purpose of replacing steel-framed windows, many of which are damaged and failing, have damaged or no screens, and they all provide poor thermal performance. The windows are original to the 1969 structure, and hereby further specifically acknowledge that by submitting this statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority in no way guarantees the acceptance or the approval of an application, the awarding of a grant, or any other funding commitment from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or commits the town of Hingham to filing an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank
And then,
you.
I think the last two things are just the transfer of insurance funds related to the high school fire and the insurance funds related to the East School flood. Given the hour, just if you could just very briefly.
I wanted to make sure I gave a fair description last time.
I appreciate that.
If you're
Maybe
aware,
slightly
we
less
had,
this time. Yeah, exactly.
We had two unfortunate incidents occur last year, one in May and one in August. The fire, of course, at the high school, which was, most were aware of, and there was a flood at East School that many are aware of. And both of those represented insurance claims. And in order, for municipal finance, in order to really use that monies to repair the buildings, we have repaired the buildings, but we've done that by overspending our operating budget. And in order to get that money back to restore into our operating budget, we need to get a vote from the town because it exceeds $150,000 worth of, each one individually exceeds $150,000 worth of insurance proceeds. So these are housekeeping votes really to ask the town, we repaired the buildings, both of them, will you move that money back to the operating budget so we can use it for education as opposed to those repairs which were covered by insurance?
Great. Questions, Mary?
No, would you take a motion?
I would.
Move favorable action on Article II.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Move favorable action on Article JJ.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. We actually have one more very important item of business, and I apologize that it's such a late hour, but we have a report from our Chief Procurement Officer, which is also Tom Mayo.
Thank you. Tough hour to be doing this. This is a big announcement for the community. I think this is something a lot of people have been waiting for a long time. It's a result of a culmination of a lot of work by a lot of people. But I have a formal statement that I think I'll read. It's a page and a half. I will do my best to get through this in a reasonable amount of time. But it's a formal process, so I do want to make sure that I dot my i's and cross my t's. So this is a notice of determination of award for the operation and maintenance of the Hingham water system, dated today, February 11, 2020. As the Chief Procurement Officer for the Town of Hingham, I have determined that Suez Water Environmental Services has submitted the most advantageous proposal in response to the town's request for proposals for the operation and maintenance of the Hingham water system, now formerly known as the Weir River Water System, in accordance with MGL Chapter 30B, Section 6. Suez is a responsible and responsive respondent who obtained the highest technical proposal ranking of highly advantageous and submitted the lowest price proposal. It is my recommendation that an award of the contract under this RFP be made to Suez, subject to the approval and execution of a contract by the Board of Selectmen, acting as the Board of Water Commissioners pursuant to Article 11 of the Town of Hingham 2019 Annual Town Meeting, and in accordance with Chapter 263 of the Acts of 2016. This recommendation comes after a comprehensive RFP process that complies with the procurement procedures outlined in MGL Chapter 30B, Section 6. In summary, this process has included the following steps: a development of an RFP in the fall or summer of 2019 with input from the Town of Hingham staff and officials, Hingham Town Council and Bond Council, Environmental Partners Group, Transition Consultant Jeff Nutting, Aquarian staff, Town of Hull staff, and staff from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. Issuance of the RFP occurred on September 23rd, 2019. A mandatory pre-response site visit was held for all interested respondents at the water treatment plant and select distribution system infrastructure sites on October 15th, 2019. Extensive question and answer period process was held for all respondents in October and November of 2019. Receipt of 3 proposals meeting the minimum evaluation criteria set forth in the RFP by December 19, 2019 submission deadline. The formation of an RFP evaluation team consisting of Michelle Monsegur, our Assistant Town Administrator, Richard Norman, a Hingham resident and member of the Water Transition and Evaluation Committee, Jeff Nutting as our Water Transition Consultant, John Struzieri, the Town of Hull's Director of Wastewater Operations, who was appointed by the Hull Board of Selectmen, Ryan Trahan of Environmental Partners Group, the Water Transition Consultant, and Joe Welch, Hingham resident and member of the Water Transition and Evaluation Committee. That group held 5 meetings in December of 2019 and January 2020 to review the technical proposals, conduct interviews with the 3 respondents, and discuss ranking respondents according to the comparative criteria set forth in the RFP. Reference checks with current clients of the 3 respondents were also performed. Review of the 3 respondents' financial statements was performed. The RFP evaluation team compiled composite rankings for each of the 3 vendors' technical proposals. Suez achieved a highly advantageous ranking. Woodard and Curran achieved an advantageous ranking, and Veolia obtained an advantageous ranking. Unanimous, the evaluation team performed or submitted a unanimous recommendation on January 21st, 2020 that the technical proposal from Suez is the most advantageous proposal for the town. Review of the price proposals by town staff, Environmental Partners Group, and Jeff Nutting occurred subsequent and determined that Suez submitted the lowest price proposal, a grand total price of $45,262,639 without billing services, or $52,258,900 $248,256, including billing services, for the total possible 10-year contract period. Recommendation from Environmental Partners Group that the town award the contract to Suez followed that price proposal review. As I stated earlier, the town undertook an extensive procurement and evaluation process to select a qualified vendor to operate and maintain the Weir River water system. I am proud of the process we have gone through, and I'm confident in the results. I would like to extend my deep gratitude to the RFP evaluation team, consultants, our legal team, and town staff who assisted in this important work.
I see representatives from Suez in the audience. I don't know whether you'd like to come to the microphone and make any comments, but we appreciate you sitting through an incredibly long meeting, and it's too late now. If you could just give your name, that'd be great.
I'm Jason O'Brien. I'm a general manager for the New England region for Suez, and I just very proud to hear that we can become a partner with the town of Hingham, and I'm looking forward to building a relationship with you here for the operations of the water treatment facility, and then be a vested partner in the town as well. So just thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here this evening. And I also see hiding in the back Jim Taylor from the Water Evaluation Committee. I don't know whether you want to make any comments. Your group's been working really hard, and we appreciate that as part of, the existence of your group was, I think, a big part of what gave town meeting confidence to move forward with this purchase. And, I think Joe and Mr. Norman's help in the RFP selection process is part of that help. So, okay. Thanks for being here tonight as well. Mary, any comments? No? Joe?
This does not mean we're going to have the Suez Canal going through Hingham. But thank you, Tom, for your efforts, Michelle, and really everyone who participated. It's tremendous. Thank you.
Comments from the audience with respect to the, yes, sir. If you could come to the microphone, name and address, please.
Good evening. Joe Sirianni, 120 Kilby Street. I'm also the representative of the Quarry and Water Company employees in our union, and I'm just wondering, on behalf of all of my crew there, what steps are we at now? Because I get the questions asked to me every day, what happens to us next? And so I'm here to ask, and hopefully you have some sort of outline or something that I can take back with me to work tomorrow and let everybody know, okay, here's where we're at.
Thanks for being here tonight. I know Tom's had some conversations about this.
Sure. Thank you, Karen. So, Joe, thank you for coming. We know that there's a lot of angst on behalf of the employees. This is your livelihood and their livelihood, and we get that. I will tell you that the town asked that the respondents to the RFP prioritize, and we incentivized a process by which they would agree to interview all of the existing employees. I'll tell you that Suez, in their bid, has committed to doing that. So that's one piece of news I hope you can bring back to the team. The other thing I would suggest is that we are working on a regular basis, weekly basis actually, if not more often, with Eversource and Aquarian towards the final transition process. I don't have dates for you yet. I just know that we are working on a regular basis to wrap this up and transition in an orderly and successful manner. Ultimately, we have to keep the public safety as a paramount concern, so we don't want to rush that process. It needs to be done right. So I appreciate your patience, and
Yep. Thank you.
You're
The
welcome.
other question I might have then is, would our union be represented? Would we be able to still continue on as a union as we have been for the past number of decades?
So these are details we'll work out between ourselves, of the town, with our new vendor throughout the contracting phase, and I don't have an answer to the question right now.
Okay, so we'll find out in the future.
But just so you know, we've all been asking those very same questions. You and the rest of your employees are very important to the town.
Thank you
And
very
so,
much. Appreciate your job.
Thank you.
Joe.
Thanks for being here this evening. I just want to thank, and I know he's here in the audience, I'd just like to thank our legal team, Kerry Ryan, Susan Murphy, and John Coughlin. In particular, the procurement process is very technical, and I think without their expert help in guiding us through that process, we wouldn't be before you tonight as successful as I think we are. So we do appreciate all your help. And again, you and Michelle did a fantastic job leading this effort. This is it really is too bad it's so late, because this is really, really an exciting moment, I think, for the town. And it's another step forward in our acquisition of the operation of the water company. So, thank you.
Just if you don't mind, Karen, I just want to add one last comment for Joe mostly. I did speak with Aquarian representatives, and they have offered to facilitate those conversations between us and Suez and Aquarian as appropriate. So I just want you to know. Yep.
Thank you. We've made aware. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay.
And the school committee is aware that now you'll have water going to the schools for a while, which is very important.
Anything further? We cleaned up a lot of our reports, and we did a liquor license for South Elementary School, so.
I think I remember that.
That was yesterday.
Right.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
So I think that concludes our agenda.
Would you take a motion?
I would.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.